Oh, okay. Yes, I'm there. I'm there. Well, good evening, everyone. It's time for us to get started. Are we broadcasting? We are, almost.
Recording in progress.
Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to the September 10th, 2024 joint meeting of the McMinnville City Council and the McMinnville Planning Commission. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 5:32 p.m. And would we like to do a roll call for the record? Anyone? Yes. And Daniel, would you do a roll call for the record, please?
Commissioner Meg Murray.
Present.
Commissioner Sila McClellan.
Present.
Commissioner Rachel Flores. Commissioner Beth Rankin.
I'm here.
Commissioner Elena Mudrak.
Present.
Commissioner Brian Randall.
Present.
Commissioner Dan Tukolsky. And Chair Winfield. Councilor Payne.
Present.
Councilor Peralta.
Here.
Councilor Chenoweth.
Present.
Councilor Geary.
Good evening.
Councilor Menke.
Present.
Council President Garvin.
Here.
And Mayor Dropkin.
Here, thank you. Tonight we're having a work session on our housing production strategy and on being a severely rent-burdened city. I would ask our Community Development Director, Heather Richards, to introduce the topic. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Good evening, commissioners and councilors. I want to introduce Beth Goodman. Many of you are familiar with her. She's with Eco Northwest and will be helping us with this work session. And then Evan Hippas is in the back setting up a sign-in sheet for us. He's our new associate housing planner. Since this is a public meeting notice for being a severely rent-burdened city, we do ask anybody who is a guest with us this evening to sign in the sign-in sheet. We will need to send that to the state. So we're going to walk you through a presentation as part of the work session to give you some information, and then we, at the end of it, have an exercise when we're going to have some discussion with you about direction on how you want us to proceed with some things. Daniel, I don't have permission to share. Okay, thank you. And then Beth is going to need permission to share as well. So my job is to set the stage for the discussion, and then Beth is going to go through the details of the housing production strategy. So tonight you have three things that we wanted to visit with you about. One is the housing production strategy itself. This is a planning product that's required by state law. We need to do it 1 year after submitting our housing needs analysis to the state. It's due December 31st, 2025, and we have hired Echo Northwest to help us with this product. This is a new product in the state of Oregon, and Echo Northwest has done several of these with other communities, so we're lucky to have them with us and their experience they bring to the table. We're also going to talk about being a severely rent-burdened city. We've been identified by the Oregon Housing and Community Services Agency as being severely rent-burdened. It's not a good list to get on, nor a good classification to get notice of. It means that over 25% of our households that are renting their homes are paying more than 50% of their income for their rent, which puts them in a very vulnerable position for housing. So state law requires those cities that are on this list to host a public meeting and to discuss the burdens of being in that status, and then discuss strategies to overcome that status. And then thirdly, we want to talk with you about land use efficiency measures. This is part of the housing production strategy work for housing, and we're also in our land use efficiency measures work task as part of our sequential UGB work plan that we agreed on with the state. We want to tell you about the status of this. It's been put on hold due to some appeals of our needs analysis that has gone to the LCDC, and we'll walk you through that and the effect that those appeals and delay are having on our grants that we receive for this work and the potential work plan. So all of these are interrelated with each other, but distinctly, discretely different, and so that's why we wanted to combine them with you tonight, and we'll go through them in their separate venues, so to speak. I always like to talk about how this reaches back into your MacTown 2032 strategic plan that we adopted as a city. This achieves two of the goals in that plan, one for housing, creating diverse housing opportunities that support great neighborhoods, and one for growth and development character. And it also achieves the objectives in there, and it's actually one of the actions that have been outlined in that strategic plan. If there's anything that I would like to leave with you tonight as we go through this process, we're in a planning process, as most planning processes through the state right now. It's fairly detailed. It's fairly wonky in terms of how the state wants us to walk through the data for it. Oftentimes I feel like we're not actually planning, but we're just data inputting. But I'd like you to think from the city of McMinnville, we do have choices, and we are sort of controlling our own destiny with this work, and sometimes we lose track of that, especially as we get into this protective mode from appeals and data and stuff like that. So our local values that I would like to leave you with tonight is we're building on a draft housing strategy that we did in 2019. We did this before the housing production strategy discussion was evolving at the state. And we did it for a very deliberate reason, which was, other than just having a housing needs analysis, we wanted to talk about, okay, how are we actually going to achieve the outcomes in this housing needs analysis? We had extensive public process, and we have since used that housing strategy, although in draft form, as staff and the Affordable Housing Committee, and have achieved a lot of the things in there. So I want to walk you through that, and there's demonstrated success. As part of that housing strategy discussion we had as a community, we had a lot of discussion about equity, and this was before we were having discussions at the statewide level about equity, and that discussion of equity boiled down to choice. So we dialogued the fact that we want our households to all have the opportunity to have a choice about their household living. We have a motto that everybody deserves to live in a great home and neighborhood. That's what sort of drove our great neighborhood principles. We also decided as a community that when we're looking at low and moderate income housing choices for our households in the low and moderate income categories, that rental high density multifamily projects should not be the only choice. Oftentimes we're pushed into this default to conclusion that building apartments serves your low and moderate income households, and that's not providing a choice. And what it's done over the years is it's really restricted generational real estate wealth. So we're putting people into a position that don't have access to wealth with less access to wealth because of the assumptions that we're making. So here at the City of McMinnville, we had already started having a discussion of we need to shift that paradigm, and we need to talk about how do we provide opportunities for ownership for all of our household incomes, if the choice is there and the opportunities there, and also rental for all of our incomes as well.
Do you mind if I add something really quickly? Just on the idea that idea is kind of emerging. I just want to take a moment to kind of acknowledge that contextually we associate mentally low-income housing with multifamily because of historic exclusionary land practices that only allowed multifamily to be built for low-income housing. And in fact, if multifamily had been allowed to be built throughout the city and the state, we might not be here right now. Thanks.
So to get to the process itself, the housing production strategy is a statutory mandate. We've talked a lot about that in here when we were going through the housing needs analysis project. We were we were put in the early list to go through this process because it had taken us so long to resolve the 2001-2003 needs analysis project. And so because of that, we originally were supposed to submit our housing capacity analysis. That's what it's now called. You'll hear me talk about housing needs analysis. They're essentially one and the same by December 31, 2023. We did not get that done. We worked with the state on a work plan and had that extended to February 29th, 2024, and we submitted it on February 27th. Because of that, we're supposed to submit our housing production strategy 1 year later. They did give us an extension to December 31, 2025 for the housing production strategy. And again, we're building off of a housing strategy that we took in draft form in June 2019. We never adopted that because by the time we got done with that work, the conversation was evolving at the state, and we wanted to see where that went with rulemaking to make sure we were achieving the standards in the rulemaking. And then we adopted our housing needs analysis through ordinance number 5141. So this work now that we're in is work based on that housing needs analysis we most recently adopted, and then that foundational strategy. So the strategy itself, we talk a lot about in McMinnville that we want to plan great neighborhoods, and we're not just being reactive and trying to put things in anywhere they can go. We're really trying to be thoughtful. We talk about growing McMinnville mindfully for a very important reason. That is because the neighborhoods we're building will be neighborhoods for the next 5 generations of people living in this community. So we want them to be thoughtful and intentional and meeting our principles of great neighborhoods. The state law requires us to identify needed housing mix. It requires us to identify average overall needed density, but it does provide flexibility for how to achieve that and how to do it within a finer grain of housing types as long as these needs are met. So we do have that local choice as to how we want to move forward with that. To remind you, in the 2018-2019, we got out into the community, asked them how they wanted to grow, up, out, or a little bit of both. Based on that, we concluded it was a little bit of both. So we got from that sort of human scale density throughout the community that people would be comfortable with, and that informed some of our choices. This slide talks about a lot of the different comments. We pulled this off of actually surveys that we did at the time in terms of what do you want to achieve for housing in our community. And so it's a variety of different needs in our community that we're trying to respond to. People who want a big house, people who just need shelter, people who want to downsize their living, people who want a yard, people who don't want a yard. So there's a variety of different needs that we're trying to respond to. We're building on our great neighborhood principles. There's 13 of them. 2 of them address housing for diverse incomes, and a housing variety is what we require in our great neighborhoods. These are principles that were put together to develop enduring value in neighborhoods so that they don't become sort of stagnant and homogeneous, but they actually evolve over time. And then we also have human scale design in our principles as well. This is an illustration of what that could look like in terms of applying those principles to a neighborhood development. We had talked a lot about the fact that we don't want to isolate people into just high-density multifamily housing. If that's not a choice that someone wants to live in that environment, that they have the opportunities for other choices as well. And we also talked about the fact that we don't want to just focus on sprawl, so not just have single-family housing that sprawls throughout the community too. In McMinnville, we had conversations about what does that look like in terms of finding sort of that mixture in there, and we had a lot of discussions about design is important here in terms of what these products look like for the community in terms of building these neighborhoods. We have a lot of neighborhoods that have been custom built that have great architectural elements associated with them, and we want to carry those forward, but be able to create the density within that. So have them look like some of the historic single-family homes that we have. And we passed in design and development standards to do that. We talked about the need to be creative. Is there a new, old way to look at how we build and grow as a community? Do we mix it up? Historically, we've sort of segregated apartment complexes and single-family neighborhoods. Do we start to mix up those housing types, make it more flexible? And we challenged ourselves not to box ourselves into the old way of thinking and really think about how to change that paradigm. We talked a lot about sort of what I call the Neapolitan ice cream product, which is the Euclidean zoning, where you have industrial on one side of the community, residential on another, and commercial in the middle. And if you look at our zoning map, it will look very familiar to you in that way. And is there a way to sort of mix that up a little bit more so that we have a more thoughtful neighborhood development occurring? So what we're doing is we're planning for 5,000 new homes, about 13,000 people into the community. That's essentially planning for a city, if you think about the cities around us and the size of those cities, adding that size of a city into McMinnville in the next 20 years. So we often challenge ourselves in the planning department to talk about how do we protect that small town charm and aesthetic of McMinnville that everyone loves so much. While providing that housing choice for our diverse community as we continue to grow, and then ensure everyone lives in a quality housing situation. That's a very delicate balance because we're no longer a small town. We're the 18th largest city in the state, and we're continuing to grow, but how do we design something that protects that charm? There's assumptions that are inherent in the traditional model, which we've talked a little bit about tonight, which is we assume more affordable housing is multifamily and high density. We assume less affordable housing is single family detached and low density. That's actually not true. You can have many apartment complexes that are higher end housing, and we challenged ourselves to think about if people want to live in a single family home and have a yard for their children, how do we do that in a way that's affordable and provide that housing choice too? So looking at our housing mix that we have in McMinnville, one of the things we discovered was that 68% of our existing mix is single family detached. We have a goal of getting a future horizon of being 55% of our housing mix being single family detached. However, of that 68%, 13% of that housing is manufactured homes. And that's a high number for a community of this size. It's almost double what we've seen in other communities of similar size. And in the manufactured homes it's about 1,000 dwellings. That's providing a housing type for low and moderate income households in our community. So it's showing how you can have a single family detached housing product that meets that household need in terms of income. So we started putting together different charts and looked at if, based on income levels, how do we get people to have the choice of being able to be single family detached or multifamily across those income spectrums. And that's when we started having discussions about codes for tiny homes and small lot residential zones and things of that nature to get there. The other thing we talked about, and this is before the missing middle housing code zone, the laws were taking place at the state, was we didn't want to have all these different residential zones. We wanted to have one zone that was for diverse housing product and another zone that was dedicated to just high density residential. And what would that look like throughout the community? And so all of that came together to create this housing strategy in 2019 that's comprised of priorities and actions. And then those actions are divided into land use strategies and non-land use strategies. And as we go into this new housing production strategy work, you're going to see we're going to have the same discussion about actions that are both land use and non-land use. So we have 7 strategies in the existing housing strategy document. I wanted to just quickly share with you a review of how we're doing with that in terms of what we've gotten done. So in these charts, you're going to see a list of all the actions that are in that document that's been provided to you as part of the packet. And then anywhere where the current status is blank, that means we haven't done it. But if there is language next to the current status, that means it's already been done or it's underway. So the first one is growth planning. And if you look at this table, there's only 2 elements that have not been completed, we haven't started with on this. That is the urban reserve area discussion. If you recall, we had a game plan to do an urban reserve area and then pull a UGB out of that. The state told us we couldn't do that. They're now saying, they're now recommending that cities do that. But so at that time, we then reversed and went into, let's do our UGB work. So those are the only 2 of the growth planning that we have not moved forward from that 2019 strategy. The others are all either completed or underway. So if you look at the list, there's things like develop area plans for the UGB. Again, this was put together in 2018, 2019, before we even decided to do that remand work for the UGB. And that's underway. We're doing that. It's update goal 5 and goal 7. That's underway. We're doing that. It's do infrastructure planning for the UGB. That's underway. We're doing that as well. With the land use efficiencies work that's part of this project, one of the growth planning actions is to establish guidance on implementation of the Great Neighborhood Principle. So we have policies and goals, but we don't have actual clear and objective standards on how to achieve those. And so that's what this intention is. And we're working on a contract with a land use planner to help us work through the code and put that together as part of our housing production strategy work. This one is for housing development in the existing UGB, strategy number 2. And if you look at this, all this is underway or has already been completed. Some of the examples in here is redesignate or rezone land for housing. We looked at that in the 3 Mile Lane area plan process, which we were doing concurrently with this process. It was the only place in town where there was enough vacant land to really make impact in that regard, and we identified several parcels and areas where we wanted to change the comprehensive plan designation to residential from industrial, and have been moving that forward, and that's where we're seeing housing production occur right now. The strategy number 3 was infrastructure and public facilities planning. Again, all of these are underway right now in terms of what we're trying to do. To highlight some of them, one was to repeal an outdated comp plan policy related to old sewer treatment capacity limitations. If you'll recall, we used to have a comp plan policy saying in the West Hills, anything west of Hill Road, we couldn't have density higher than, I don't even remember the units per acre, but it was a limitation on the units per acre because we didn't have the infrastructure capacity to serve that area yet. We solved that problem, we removed that limitation, and then the hillside subdivision plan came in with a higher density with more lots to be served through that process. Also on here is identify issues and plan for Water Zone 2 infrastructure improvements. We've been working on that with Mac Water and Light for many years, and we're near a solution for that as well to open up those 300 and plus lots that are currently in the city and zoned for development that are reliant upon that infrastructure. The strategy number 4, special area planning. We've done 2 of the 3 of these. So the city center housing strategy, 3 Mile Lane area for housing, and the one we haven't done is undertake a Highway 99W corridor study looking at opportunities for higher density housing. We have not done this. This is one of those specialty plans that I described to you when I talked about our work plan, that we're spending so much time over here doing what's prescribed to us that we can't do the real planning work over here. because of resources and time, but this is one of those that I would recommend we do. And these ones that we haven't done yet are all things we can discuss about actions for this new housing production strategy. 5 is land use and code amendments. We've done most of these. Some are assigned into this work that we're doing right now, and 3 of them are one's underway and coming to you soon, so allow small residential lots. The Affordable Housing Committee worked on that, and they're ready to hand that off to the Planning Commission. And then there's a discussion about mandating minimum residential densities or increasing allowable residential densities. We have not tackled those discussions. I suspect that will probably be part of this next generation of work. Where we haven't, so we've made a lot of progress on the land use piece of it, and that's the piece the city can control without a lot of resources. Where we haven't made a lot of progress is in the program piece of it, because these are resource intensive. And this is where I think you're going to have a lot of dialogue as a policy group relative to what we put into this housing production strategy work. The first one is affordable housing programs. You'll note that most of it we haven't completed. They are either property tax abatements or they are dependent upon hard dollars, either the city waiving hard dollars or us getting hard dollars to make a program happen. What we have done is we have pursued funds for affordable housing. So we've set up a bank of money in the urban renewal program to respond to housing. If something comes in the urban renewal area as part of the city center housing strategy. We did put together the construction excise tax, and we're now moving that program forward. And we do go after CDBG funds for housing rehab. We had on our list to also look at transient lodging tax funds for affordable housing, since that's serving a particular workforce that is in tourism, and tourism is one of our economic development strategies. That's been dialogued at the state several times, and I don't know where that will go, but that's something that's still on our list. And then the last strategy, leveraging partnerships for housing. We've been successful at this in some regards, and we're working on the other. So we worked with Stratus Village to, 1, place them on land, 2, work with the state to try to get a different category for the tax credit program so they could access funds in a competitive way. We went after the funds for the navigation center. We're working with community home builders, and they're granting opportunities from USDA and rural development to try and change some of the specters associated with that in terms of barriers for McMinnville as we hit 35,000 and them not being able to access funds for those projects. Very important projects here. And then we're working with Operation Generation to get them resources. So the city's been partnering on all these projects to bring resources to the table. The Affordable Housing Committee is now starting discussion about a community land trust. And what we haven't talked about is an affordable housing property tax abatement or land banking. So again, I suspect those will be part of the actions of this future work. The future work is we need to identify actions that the city will undertake in the timeline of 8 years to implement the needs in our housing needs analysis. Those actions can be reducing financial and regulatory impediments to developing needed housing, so that's the land use piece of it. It could be the creation of financial and regulatory incentives for development of needed housing. That's the resource piece of it. And it could be the development of a plan to access resources available at local, regional, and state levels. So that's the partnership piece of it. We must evaluate our progress on this plan at the midterm, which is 4 years. So we have to, in 4 years, look at the plan and see how we've progressed and moved forward. And Beth is going to talk a little bit more about that because they're in rulemaking right now at the state about exactly what that looks like and the opportunities and consequences of that work. So lastly, before I turn it over to Beth, I want to talk a little bit about being severely rent burdened and what does that mean. So this is a rule that the state adopted, I believe, in 2018. And what the state wanted to identify is how much of a crisis do we have for affordable housing right now in the state of Oregon? So they directed the State Agency of Housing and Community Services to assess and identify cities with populations over 10,000 where greater than 25% of renter households pay more than 50% of the monthly income on rent. So if you think about that, their paychecks, half of it's going to their housing, to just rent, actually. In 2024, we received a notice that we had made that list. So we've been hovering below it for the last couple of years, and just in 2024, we made it. That's based on 2022 data. So 26.5% of our renter households are paying more than 50% of their monthly income on rent. I suspect it's higher now as new data will emerge. So if you hit that list, you have to hold one public meeting to discuss rent burdens and their causes and potential solutions. You have to report your meeting minutes and attendees. That's why we need the sign-up list. You have to complete and submit a survey, and we'll be doing that. And then we have to do a number of reports as well that we need to send to the state. So we'll be doing that too. So essentially it's collecting data and then having a discussion on how do we reverse the trend. I can tell you I was looking at the list over the last 5 years. There are some cities who have successfully gotten off the list. I wanted to understand, I mean, can you get past this? And I think the city of Bend just recently came off the list. They were on it previously. But so that's part of our discussion of strategies to meet housing need will also help us with that severely rent burden discussion. So with that, if you don't have any questions on that context, Beth is going to lead us through a discussion on the housing production strategy work we need to do now, the being severely rent burdened, and the strategies and actions that the City Council and Planning Commission would like to consider to reverse that trend and put into the housing production strategy.
Yeah, any questions before Councilor Peralta?
Thank you, Mayor. First, I just want to say I really appreciate the presentation, Heather, and the information and the work that you've done to try and address this already. I had a question about, and this is not central to the discussion, but I had a question about the assumptions that we're making about population growth, because it seems to me that we put together the planning around that in 2019, and there's been a significant shift in population in Oregon in terms of a reduction in the rate of growth. Is that something that is going to be accounted for in this planning, or are we just sort of going to stick with the assumption about the growth that
We have to, so the two-step process for the state is do the housing needs analysis, submit it to the state and get it acknowledged. That's based on population forecast. So we made a decision as a city, rather than redo the work, we were going to continue the work that we had invested in and submit that to the state. Then the housing production strategy is responding to that need that's identified in that needs analysis. We're now in a cycle, though, of every 8 years, we need to update that housing needs analysis. So we'll probably be starting that in 4 or 5 years from now. And then we'll, I'm assuming, have to update our housing production strategy within a year of that as well.
So how does so just for the group, I mean, so your estimate was we're going to grow about 10,000 population by 2041, was that the?
Based on the numbers back in 2019, it was 12,800.
12,000.
We're growing to, I shouldn't remember this, 44 or something? Yeah.
Right.
So now it's less than 10,000.
The estimate is now less, it was 12 and now it's less than 10?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is the piece I don't like about Oregon land use planning. We're always looking backwards, and we're always stuck in this data that we just grapple with and spend years arguing over, that we don't actually move the dial on outcomes. But, we had to present something to the state. We had to create an existing snapshot. We created the existing snapshot. It took us 4 years to get it to the state, so we've grown since then.
Right. I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is that when we did the planning in 2019, the county population growth was like 2.5% or something, right? But now it's 1% or less. And so I just feel like the assumptions that we're making might we might not need to plan for quite as much growth.
Yeah, I could play devil's advocate and say our population forecasts that are done by the state are based on historic trends. If you don't have land supply and housing's not being built, you have compressed historic trends, right? And the state of Oregon is in a housing deficit of 150,000 homes. So
Yeah.
I think if we're going to look at, we've created our own hamster wheel that we're kind of spinning on right now. And my question would be, is that really data showing what our future needs are?
And I think this sounds right to me, but your view is that basically the reduction in population growth in Oregon is tied to the high housing prices, and that as that alleviates, then the population growth will sort of.
I think the focus on a forecasted population growth is misguided, especially the way we focus on it down to the nth degree, especially here in McMinnville, because it's a forecast. I think what we should be focused on is what's happening to housing in our community today. How are people able to achieve it? I would argue that in the 8 years I've been here, I've seen housing prices escalate at an exponential rate, at a much higher exponential rate than our income has. And the ability to obtain housing here in McMinnville has displaced certain household incomes in just the 8 years that I've been here. And that's a trend I can see very clearly, and it's a trend I can see moving forward because we're still in a low housing supply production. So to me, my concern is, where do people find homes to live in? We have generations of people, you and I have children of the same generation. My kids are not thinking about living here. They're not thinking about living in the state of Oregon either, because housing's too expensive.
Yeah.
But we want that generation to live here. So I'd rather focus on that type of scenario and story and how to respond to that than get caught up in sort of, I always call it wonky, but I think it's wonky, the fight over the numbers when we clearly see issues that we need to solve.
May I respond? Thanks. I just want to say thank you. That was really well articulated, and I agree with everything you said about being forward-looking and the need to focus on housing production. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and if we're, by the state, we're going to be doing this every 8 years, so checks and balances are in there. If we're not growing at a rate that, in 8 years that we thought we'd be growing at, we'll be in a check and balance place for that.
Thank you. Councillor Payne.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I'm concerned about the data, so I just wonder if you can tell me, while we're proceeding with these goals, if data can remove us from the list in the next, so we're talking 8 years. So if next year, for example, we bump down to 24.5%.
Oh, from the severely rent burden list? Yes, that's data driven. So, and it's taken from, the state has made a decision to take it from the census data from the American Community Survey. So that's that 5-year extrapolation. So they look at it every year and update it.
So McMinnville could get bumped from the list, and then this is all for nothing.
The severely rent burden aspect of
Okay.
what we're talking about
Okay.
tonight is for nothing. The housing production strategy work is mandated by state law, and we have to submit that
Okay.
by the end of 2025. And as Beth is going to talk with you about, we actually have to progress on the strategies and actions that we put into that product, or there are consequences for the city.
Okay, thank you for that. 2 more questions. So my next question is, you talked about rezoning land. I'm curious if there's been an inventory of land that's already zoned residential, that's vacant, or condemnable feels like too strong a word, but I know that, there's certain properties that the city responds to on code enforcement to clean up regularly. So I'm wondering if anything that's already been zoned residential has been considered part of the strategy and inventoried.
So yes, we have an inventory. That's what we submitted to the state. We did a buildable lands inventory. So we know what's developed, what's partially developed, and what's vacant. And that's what drove into, okay, what is our need? So all that data has been compiled, and that's what's at the state right now that we're building on. I guess what I would say is, for this production strategy, we can go back and look at the data and rework that. But this production strategy is taking the next chapter, which is, okay, we have data, data's not perfect, forecasting's not perfect, but we know we have problems. How do we solve the problems? Here are some strategies and actions to solve those problems.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking more along the lines of land that's already got single-family housing, but could be maybe not necessarily rezoned. It perhaps is already R3 or R4 or whatever, but there's a few properties that are coming to mind. A couple of them are in my neighborhood. And so I'm just curious, because they're inventoried as single-family residential right now, if they've been inventoried for another model, even though they're not vacant.
So the inventory we do shows is based on the underlying zoning. So we have a whole neighborhood here south of the downtown that is high-density residential, R4, and there's many single-family lots in there. So we're identifying where the opportunities are for redevelopment and higher-density housing, and the zoning already exists. Now, I always say this because we talk about ADUs are the magic bullet for solving our housing problem, the missing middle housing, redevelopment. Redevelopment means that a property owner is making a conscious choice to redevelop their property. So somebody who's living on the property has to make a choice. I'm no longer going to live this lifestyle on my property, and it's going to get redeveloped to X. Those choices aren't made very often.
If I may, Councilor Payne, if you are asking also if the city is evaluating kind of derelict properties for redevelopment, which is what I hear you asking, I think that is a couple things. One is that that work would kind of live initially, I believe, within the McMinnville Affordable Housing Commission, if it was to be something to suggested at. To kind of in part with that is when we have had conversations about it in the past, the sentiment has kind of been that it's a very, very low impact based on the overall need versus the potential. But even more so, I think the important thing to point out is that some of the code changes that we've been making over the last couple of years are actually encouraging what have been derelict properties to redevelop and with more housing. And so in your ward, you might think of the fraternity that has been fenced off and infested with rabbits and overgrown with blackberries for many years that now has 4 homes on it.
4 duplexes.
4 duplexes, excuse me.
That wasn't the one, but there's another one that is in our, well, there's 2 others in our ward, but we can talk about that later.
More than 2.
And
Yeah.
you have a third question before we move on in the presentation?
It's probably a little loaded, but how do we as a city control the affordability?
Well, that's what we're going to talk about.
Okay, any other questions then before we move on to the second part of the work session? All right, Beth, I believe the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got 45 minutes here, and I want to see if we can get to some discussion of policy. So, pardon me for a moment. I may well breeze through some of this a little bit fast, but we can always return to this a little bit later. So, pardon me as I just adjust my screen a little. Ooh, I don't want that. There we go. All right, so a housing production strategy is an 8-year action plan. So what it is essentially a plan for what people like Heather and Evan are going to do over the next 8 years with the Planning Commission, the City Council, and through public presentation, public involvement, that kind of thing. So it's not actually solving the problem itself, it's the plan to solve parts of the problem. The problem, as Heather just talked about, is a very big problem. It will be challenging to solve, and I would say you can't unwind a problem, affordability, that has been built up for at least the last 40 or 50 years. So a housing production strategy includes looking at more data, developing strategies that meet the housing need as articulated in the housing capacity analysis, and then putting those all into a report, getting it adopted, doing the work of beginning to implement it, and then reporting to the state on it. And we'll talk more about state requirements in a few minutes. So the housing needs analysis, your housing capacity analysis, is primarily about buildable land and housing market, that kind of thing, the forecast of new housing. The housing production strategy is really about understanding what your current policies are to support housing development, especially development of housing that is affordable for people to live and work in McMinnville. And I say affordable, I don't just mean low-income housing, I mean affordable at all income levels. And then looking at other strategies or approaches or actions to meeting the identified housing needs, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So in this project, we're looking at the housing needs. We're mostly through item 1. We'll also be looking at land use efficiency measures. We're really focused here on developing the housing actions, and we'll be talking with the Affordable Housing Committee later on in September about some of the actions on the list. And then we have to finish this up by spring 2025, and the city needs to adopt its housing production strategy by the end of 2025. So the unmet housing needs. I'm breezing through this very, very quickly, and I'm going to skip this one because Heather's just talked about it. When we're thinking about future housing needs, think about the factors that affect housing choice and the kind of housing that people live in. They're primarily age of the adults in the household composition, and income. Income generally increases with age until retirement age. Household income generally changes with age. And may be different over the life of a household. So we're paying attention to all of these demographic factors. And when we look at this, what we're seeing is that, pardon me, I'm just trying to get this window off my window. More than half of McMinnville's population is younger than 20 years old or older than 60. So you've got a lot of young people and a lot of older people. That'll affect the different types of housing you need here. And so it's one way of saying you need family households for families with children, as well as households for older adults. There we go, hold on. Your population has a larger share of BIPOC, so people of color and Hispanic population than an awful lot of cities in Oregon. So we're paying attention to the fact that you're racially and ethnically diverse. Looking at where you have people live and work in McMinnville, I'm actually a little surprised that you have so many jobs for people who live in McMinnville, so a fair number of people live and work here, but you've also got a lot of commuting for people who live here, commuting out, and for people who don't live in the city, commuting into the city. So we're paying attention to commuting flows. Your median home sales price, here it looks like it's not so bad, but that's because we're comparing it to some of the harshest housing markets in Oregon. So looking at Hood River and Ashland and Sherwood, et cetera. Between 2012 and 2022, household income increased by 51% in McMinnville. Rents increased by about 68%, so outpacing household income. Sales price increased by 173%. And that's what Heather was talking about a few minutes ago. If you took away one stat from this presentation, it's this set of statistics. So evidently I want you to take away 3 stats. Your monthly asking rents, these are not including electricity and other utility costs. You can see that they have steadily risen since 2014 is the data we're presenting there. And that median household incomes have increased in McMinnville as they have in Yamhill County and Oregon, but on average, McMinnville household incomes are below Yamhill County averages and Oregon averages. And here we're just showing the wide range of income distribution. You've got some very low income households, so 19% of your households have income below $25,000 and 31% have incomes above $100,000. So this is worth a little bit of a pause to look at this slide. This is looking at financially attainable housing based on McMinnville household income. So a household in McMinnville that earns the average household income, $65,000. If you assume that they pay 30% or less of their their income on housing costs, that would be about $1,600 a month. When we look at your average rent, it's about $1,500 a month. So basically, your median household income can about afford the rent. It's a little bit better than being able to afford rent, but not much. When we look at your median sales price at $473,000, quite clearly that is not affordable to your average household income. And in fact, you'd have to earn about $158,000 to afford that median sales price. So sales prices in McMinnville, on average, some are above that, some are below that, are very far out of reach for an awful lot of households in McMinnville. When we look at your existing households by income level, what we see is that about 30% of your households have income of less than 60% of your median household income, so income of less than $40,000. If I pop back here, they can afford a little less than $1,000 in housing costs. How many units can you think of that you can rent here in McMinnville for $1,000? I'm willing to bet that there's very few. And then you look at your sort of low and middle income households, those earning between 60% of household income and 120% of household income, and you've got a little more than a quarter of your households in that group. So 42% of your households are in the above 120%, so they're over average. But when you think about how much over average you have to be to afford current sales prices. Now, of course, an awful lot of people who are homeowners have owned their home for a little while, and perhaps they got it before our most recent run-ups in housing costs, and that's how you have some existing homeowners. But looking forward, if we have an income distribution that's similar to this, you're going to continue having quite a lot of housing need at below 60% of median of average household income, which is below market rate, generally speaking. So what they can afford is housing that's less than newly built market rate housing. So you really can't build new housing that's affordable to those groups. In the 60 to 80% of median household income, it's hard to build new housing that's affordable there. You don't see it in most cities. And then in the 80 to 120% newly built housing is more likely to be affordable. But again, we're not talking about single-family home ownership or many other types of home ownership that's affordable at 80 to 120%. Some types of middle housing for home ownership, like duplexes, in some housing markets, those are affordable at those income levels. We haven't tested that, and we won't be testing that in this project for McMinnville, but I know in some parts of the state that is affordable. So then heading on towards cost burden a little bit, what we see is McMinnville is about as cost burdened as some of the comparison cities. You might think, hey, McMinnville's worse off than Ashland or than Hood River. That's terrible. You also might think Hood River is so cost burdened that people can't afford to live there. So McMinnville's sort of hanging on a little bit by the edges of its teeth in terms of increasing housing costs and people not being forced out of McMinnville, although I'm sure that has happened. That's what we're seeing in a lot of our communities. So when we look at this by tenure, what you see is that 56% of your renter households are cost burdened. 26% of them are severely cost burdened. And so that's paying more than 50% of their income on housing costs. Cost burden is less common for owners than it is for renters. This mirrors what we're seeing across the state. I'm not saying it's good or that it's okay. I'm saying that this is very much the state's story at this point. So I've talked a lot about income and that kind of housing need. So as we're looking at the housing needs in your housing production strategy, we're looking at how housing needs differ based also on demographics. So you've got people who are experiencing homelessness, you've got people of color, you've got people who are over 65 years old, people with disabilities. There are other federal and state protected classes that we look at as we're doing this. So we're trying to bring information into this that's either quantitative information of the type that we're showing here, or qualitative through talking with people, so doing some public outreach to some of the marginalized communities. We'll be doing more of that, and Evan is working with us, and also, I forget the Latino nonprofit that you're working with on a Advanced Economic Solutions, all right, on some outreach to your Spanish-speaking communities. So what we're looking at here is that people who identify as Hispanic in McMinnville, on average, and this is true for Yamhill County, their income is lower than the overall average. Where you see these things that look like lines, the bars and whiskers, those are margins of error. And so since McMinnville is relatively small and your Hispanic population is relatively small, margin of error for Hispanic household incomes kind of high, but it's smaller for Yamhill County. And then when we look at the overall average, that's where you've got the smallest margins of error. So we're acknowledging the fact that the data isn't perfect, and sometimes it's just not good, which is why the qualitative outreach is also important. So when you look at people as they age, once you're over 65 years old, generally speaking, your household income decreases, especially if you have people who are retiring. This does not account for accumulated wealth. This also doesn't account for accumulated debt. So this information is partial, but you don't have good information about accumulated wealth or debt at anything like the state level, much less the city or county level. So we just can't bring that kind of information to the table. But the housing needs of people who are older are distinctly different than the housing needs, say, of a young family with children. So you might have a greater incidence of people with some form of disability as they age, or you might have a smaller household size, so a more one-person household or two-people household at that age. With age also, you need to consider the fact that some households will be looking at opportunities for multifamily, multi-generational housing. And so that's one type of housing need that we have identified and will be talking about some in the housing production strategy. And then looking at information about disability, about 22% of McMinnville's population has more than one or more disabilities. If you add up these percentages, it's way more than 22%, but that's because some people have more than one disability. So your most common disabilities, like ambulatory difficulties, those can have implications for housing need and access to housing. So for instance, my mother-in-law had a stroke a number of years ago. She's in a wheelchair. To keep her in her home, we needed to get a ramp built, doorways widened, et cetera, to accommodate her. And so when you're thinking about in your housing production strategy, what can we do to support access to housing for people with disabilities, there's some options there that we'll be bringing up and that we'll be discussing a little bit later. So some of the themes that we've heard in discussions with some of our different groups as we've been talking to stakeholders about this is about access to affordable housing. So looking at zoning changes that allow more diverse housing types, you've made a lot of those changes. There may be some more opportunities for those. Considering that you need market rate and income restricted affordable housing. As I think somebody pointed out a few minutes ago, essentially you made the point that McMinnville doesn't build housing. How can you affect affordability, I think was the question. And that is very true, and we will be thinking about that in the HPS, because clearly cities don't build housing. And of course, infrastructure planning, especially in your urban growth areas and areas that have long had infrastructure deficiencies. Those are important things to consider. So you need access to housing that meets a household's needs. I'll let you read about that one. And you also need access to housing without discrimination. Housing discrimination is, for those of us who haven't experienced it, it's surprisingly common. And so we'll be talking about ways to increase fair housing and affirmatively further fair housing and things that the city can do to support that. I feel like I have just bombed through that section. Can somebody tell me what time it is? 6:30. 6:30, all right. All right, so we have to identify actions for inclusion in the housing production strategy. We're looking at actions that you've already completed, and we'll be talking about those actions as things that you've been doing and presumably will continue to do. Will be land use efficiency measures that will be things that don't necessarily get into the housing production strategy, but will be talked about there, because you'll be executing on those land use efficiency measures very likely before or just as you're adopting your housing production strategy. So your requirements, you have to adopt your HPS by December 2025. What you have to do is commit to implementing the actions in the HPS over the 2026 to 2033 period. I think of this as making a good faith effort. You're going to be required to report to DLCD on implementation progress, and eventually on the effectiveness of these strategies in the future. Now, some of the strategies you'll have adopted will have long-term effectiveness, or maybe long-term effective, and you want to have seen those effects by 2023. And yeah, some of this is going to take 2 or 3 housing production cycles to see the impacts of these. Remember that strategies not identified in the HPS can still be implemented by the city. So, in thinking about this, taken all together, the strategies in the HPS have to achieve or help achieve more fair and equitable outcomes in terms of affordable home ownership and affordable rental housing, in terms of avoiding gentrification or increasing housing stability. Housing options for people experiencing homelessness, increasing affordable housing options within compact mixed-use areas, increasing housing choice in safe neighborhoods with high-quality amenities. That's really what your great neighborhoods principles are really about. And then increasing fair housing, so affirmatively furthering fair housing. So as we're thinking about the actions, we'll be thinking about making sure that we've got actions that address all of these things. Some of these actions can be things that the cities are already doing, so you get credit for what you're doing. And some of these will be new actions. And you may have heard the states in rulemaking around all of this. And so my firm is, not me personally on this, but my firm is supporting the rulemaking process for the new statewide policies. The rules will be finalized in December 2024. So the rules include a midpoint review at 4 years, where the city is going to have to summarize your actions that have been implemented to address your unmet housing need. Your housing production strategy is going to have a schedule in it during, which you will say, we're going to do this action by this date, that action by this other date. And so what have you done up to year 4, and have you done the things you said you'd do? For things that you haven't done that you said you'd do, why haven't you done them? It may well be, we're almost done them, it'll be adopted next month. Or it may well be, we evaluated an action and decided that it's just not feasible for us to do for whatever reason. And so then you will have to identify a new action to address that identified housing need. So all of that is going to happen in this thing called the Housing Acceleration Program. the rules are still being, the rules are still being written for all of this right now. So it's not entirely clear what this will look like. I'm hoping, and this is my personal hope, that the acceleration program can be looked at as a way of providing assistance to cities that are trying to do something that supports affordable housing development, but are just running into barriers. You can also view it as we failed. We're in the housing acceleration program. But I'm hoping that that's not the way it's taken. It could sound like that, though. So cities could be referred to the housing acceleration program because they haven't adopted their HPS on time. Because they haven't undertaken actions in the HPS on the schedule that they said they would. That's what I think many cities will be in the acceleration program for, because it's easy for things to take longer than you expect it to. It also has implications for us as we think about what we should put in the schedule when. LCDC, the Land Conservation and Development Commission, can refer cities. And then cities who are underperforming relative to their region, and you're part of the larger Willamette Valley region, can be referred into the acceleration program. When you're in the acceleration program, the state, DLCD, is going to lead an audit of barriers to housing production, affordability, and housing choice. So they're going to try to help the city figure out what the problem is, and then enter into an agreement to take actions that are within the city's control. So what I keep hearing from DLCD staff is we're going to meet cities with help, so grant funding, that kind of thing. Now, getting a lot of this done, getting more housing that's affordable built, is going to depend on your partnerships, on state funds for certain types of housing development, possibly on state funds for infrastructure. If any of you have any pull at the legislature, tell them cities need more funding for infrastructure, and affordable housing, because those are two big problems. So what this will look like and how it will play out, I can't tell you. These last couple of slides were ones that I had from DLCD, and I'm trying to convey the spirit as well as the actuality of what they're saying. And then there's also going to be the new Office of Housing Accountability and Production. And I didn't understand what HAPO was. I thought it was part of the acceleration program, but no. It's focused on enforcement of state regulations around housing laws related to development. So if a city isn't obeying the housing laws, HAPO will step in and provide technical assistance to meet those state laws. So for instance, if your city hadn't adopted the missing middle housing code on the schedule that you said, or on the schedule that the legislature set out, if we'd had HAPO, HAPO might have stepped in and helped the city with that. Helped. Okay. So some of the barriers to housing development. I would say your biggest area issue is about available development-ready, buildable land. With that goes need for...
Can I ask a question before you go into this one?
Yes, ma'am.
HAPO, sorry to interrupt. Is there any conversation about any type of funding to support the staffing demands as part of the assistance, or is the discussion around sending individuals to do technical assistance, or could you define what assistance means, or loosely define it since it's not all set in stone yet?
Yes and not really. So there's technical assistance has historically, and I believe it's intended to continue, been around things like getting consultants, doing studies, helping code revisions, that kind of thing. I have heard, and I have not heard anything definitive about helping fund staffing at cities.
With the proposals around bringing in outside assistance like consultants, would the financial responsibility of that then fall on the city of whatever the state?
The state has been funding that the last few years.
Okay.
So what happens 10 years from now when the legislature is less on fire about housing? I can't tell you.
The state funds it partially.
Yeah, okay, mhm.
We have to provide, so it's similar to the grants that we've been receiving the last several years. So the state has funds set aside for technical assistance grants. They're not 100% grants because they're trying to meet a lot of different needs. So typically it's a partial grant funding for a project cost, and then the city, just like you see in the budget that comes to you from planning, there's the grant side, and then there's the match side from the general fund.
Okay, and do you know any timeline on this office development?
It's being developed now. They're trying to hire the manager of the office, and that's been a little bit challenging. So, because hiring right now is just generally challenging. And I would imagine the next legislative cycle, we'll see what the legislature puts in for funding for HAPO. So I imagine it'll be a biennium by biennium sort of thing.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions before I dive on?
Doesn't look like it.
There's a lot of unknowns. All right, so when you're thinking about actions, what do we need to do? You know, the obvious question to me is, what are we trying to solve for? So these barriers are trying to help with the problem definition. You've known for a long time about lack of available development-ready buildable land. Even if you have land in your urban growth boundary, it has to be serviced, and it has to have willing landowners before it can develop. So need for infrastructure goes right with that. You're working on some more of the specific area planning, but that's going to be an ongoing need. Looking at your urban holding zone and setting up, I would imagine this happens in this area-specific planning, setting up the specific zoning, including rezoning some land to R5, so you've got a little bit more land, it's a little bit more higher density. Your R5 zone, I don't think currently has any land zoned in it, so that will be a new opportunity. Looking at code changes to implement the Great Neighborhoods principles. That's something that will be in your land use efficiency measures, I believe. And then looking at challenges to getting affordable housing developed. So one of the big challenges is need for funding. You also have challenges for people who are using existing Section 8 housing choice vouchers. They often can't find housing that qualifies for the voucher or where the landlord will take the voucher. That's some of the problem. And then there's some current state law problems, like with the inclusionary zoning policy in state law, which I'm hoping not to go into right now, and then limitations of staff capacity and city funding. So those are some of our barriers.
On the voucher program, do you happen to have any of our area data at your fingertips? Needed to shut the list because it became so long, if I remember correctly. Do you know how long how many people are waiting on that list right now?
I don't know if they're currently in a position where they've put a moratorium on adding more people to the wait list. I just know they're currently in a 4-year wait list program.
Okay, thank you.
And so some of addressing that will be about getting more housing built in general for rental, and where it's possible, housing where vouchers will be accepted. So sometimes that ends up being about a certain type of income restricted housing. All right, and then you've got barriers to accessing housing that's affordable. So, you don't have enough land zoned quite the right way now. That's a change that you'll be making as you're doing that area planning and as you're continuing doing some of that work. Inadequate supply of development-ready land, I feel like I'm just, repeating some of those. Funding and resources to support development of income-restricted affordable housing. So income-restricted affordable housing is housing that's affordable at 60% or less of the area median income for Yamhill County. And then you just don't have enough nonprofit capacity to support affordable housing development. So some of these things, the first three are a little more within the city's purview, but the last two are certainly outside of the city's purview directly and are going to involve partnering and working on getting grants, with your partners, that kind of thing. Let's go talk about, I'm going to skip that one. We're doing engagement. We can talk more about this if we have time at the end, but I want to talk about some of the potential actions for inclusion in the HPS. So things like, I think we sent you, did we send out this memo?
Yeah, and they all have a copy of it.
Okay, so we'll look at this in a little more detail in a moment or two. But growth planning, more broadly, I think these are all the things that you went over a few minutes ago, so I'm not going to repeat those words. So potential actions in the HPS. So rezoning land for housing, so land that isn't currently zoned for housing, including rezoning land for R5. Identifying land that's specifically for affordable housing development. And so I would think about that as land perhaps that the city may own or the city may purchase, say, through urban renewal, for instance, where you can do with a partner income-restricted housing development. Through working with, say, a community land trust. I'm going to be interested in discussing that with the Affordable Housing Committee. Looking at opportunities for home ownership support. So if you had your CET, which last I think I heard you guys didn't have a CET in place?
No, we do.
You do have your
We've had it
CET?
for 2 years.
Okay, so you can use some of those funds, say, for down payment assistant or a nonprofit partnership, or you can also use some of them for the some of the types of property tax abatements or property tax exemptions that we've got in our memo here. Look at SDC financing, so spreading payments over time to reduce upfront development costs. That can apply to income-restricted housing. It could also, if you chose to, apply it to market rate housing, which may make it a little easier to get market rate housing, which is not specifically affordable, but it's more housing that's not hugely unaffordable built. Looking at fees for demolition of affordable housing, the property tax abatements that we've got listed here, the affordable housing property tax abatement, there's like 2 of those, and those are really for income-restricted housing, and the multi-unit limited tax abatement, which is for getting some more affordable, relatively affordable, multifamily housing built by market rate developers. And then, I don't know, I wish you luck in using your transient lodging tax
I'm
funds
curious,
for affordable
why-
housing.
Why does that keep coming up in there? Because it would be illegal for us to use our transient lodging taxes to build any housing, and I bet it was on a former slide too.
So it was on the former slide as a, much like inclusionary zoning's been a discussion here, which would be an advocacy work at the state level to try and get those laws changed to enable it to be used that way.
Only 30% of your transient lodging tax can be used for things that aren't specifically tourism-related. And so could say workforce housing be identified as something that's tourism-related?
So right before the pandemic, is the Affordable Housing Commission had been in existence for probably 6, 7 years at that time. and had operated as a unfunded commission for its entire length earlier when there was a note, something about you've changed a lot of codes, these are things you can do without a lot of money. That's why we did those things, is because we didn't have any dedicated funds, so we did all the things that you could do without money. And we being the McMinnville Affordable Housing Commission, came to the council and asked to have some of the TLT funds that were going into the general fund dedicated to the McMinnville Affordable Housing Commission, which actually the council approved, but then before, and please correct me if I'm remembering this incorrectly, but before that was we ever got the first disbursement for that to be used, the pandemic hit, and then that ended that. And so then the MHC went on and continued to work with a $0 budget until after three tries with the council, we passed the construction excise tax, which is under the purview of that committee, more or less. And I guess I bring that all up mostly because you brought up TLT twice, but also that construction excise tax is the only funding that is currently going into the McMinnville Affordable Housing Commission, and those funds are being used, at least some of those funds are being used to partially pay for a planner to work on affordable housing, but I think I'm calling attention to it because there aren't a lot of things in the suggestions that are coming forward that actually help build any bank towards doing some of these other action items, and so this feels like an appropriate time to raise it in case that's something the council wants to consider in the future.
Well, you hit one of the things that I plan to talk about with staff and throughout the project, which is how do you get more money? Because money is essential to doing all of this. And I've occasionally almost got thrown out of the room for this, but do you think about something like a bond measure for affordable housing? I'm guessing from a laugh or two that maybe that's come up before. In grants past, they were like, get out of here, don't talk about that publicly. In other places like Metro has had an affordable housing bond. I'm not saying that you're Metro. Other cities are considering it. It might be something that you want on the list for consideration. There's not a lot of great sources of potential funding. So some cities have considered using marijuana tax revenue, but it's oftentimes that they've been at the top of their tax rate and it's already allocated. In a city or two, they've talked about something like a sales tax, and again, that's very popular with Oregonians. I hear that the state is discussing, I know, I'm sorry, I'm being a little flippant. The state is discussing some options for affordability for the next, for income funding for the next biennium. And I'm going to be interested in seeing how some of those move forward. And we might incorporate them in a couple of different ways in the HPS so that we're not leaving you stuck if none of those move forward. But funding is going to be a big one, and there's no silver bullet here. Or the closest to a silver bullet is the bond, and that's publicly very hard.
And just to put it in perspective, so the Affordable Housing Committee is right now in the discussion about construction excise tax, and over the past year, I've heard it discussed here at the policy level, well, we can use construction excise tax to backfill this or backfill that for affordable housing. We did a calculation to try and understand how much money there is going to be achieved annually in the construction excise tax program, and I think it was $250,000 to $300,000 a year, and that's because we are in a limited permitting situation because of our land issue, but it's not a lot.
And there's a limit on how much can go into any one project, right?
Well, no, luckily, the way that the city passed the CET program is we passed it in a way that all the funds are going to affordable housing programs or developer incentives. There are some buckets in there that we need to be working with within the law, but there's some broad opportunity. But it was, after working through the math, it was an aha moment, I think, for most people on the committee, don't you think, Councilor Menke, as to how much revenue that is generating annually in terms of impact?
Urban renewal, of course, being another
Frankly, I
good
was
source.
surprised it was that much, but yeah.
Urban renewal, I forgot to list that one. That's the other fairly good one. So my question in the last 5 minutes, and perhaps if you have thoughts on this afterwards, you could email Heather and Evan. What's not on the list that you think should be on the list? Ms. Mary, you hit funding is one of the big ones.
The list being
Yes.
this list.
That list. And so we'll be asking that same question of the Affordable Housing Committee. One of the things in listening to this presentation that came to my mind was preservation of manufactured home parks. Should we be thinking about an action around that? And so would you like to have people send their thoughts on to staff?
We do have, so we have another public meeting starting in 4 minutes, so we have to be kind of mindful of that, but why don't we try to quickly go around the table if anybody has anything they want to submit right now, and then we can have a moment to reconvene on a great way for everyone to have a chance to follow up. Council President, I'll start with you on my left, and then we'll just go all the way around, ending with me.
Thank you for the presentation, lots of information. The one thing that you just touched on was manufactured homes. The parks seem to see an ever-increasing space rent cost, and so I get that somebody can get into those at a cheaper rate, but their space rents tend to escalate just like apartment rents do. And so I would like to see more, or another rendition of what we see off Wallace and Donahue and that area where you have manufactured homes on smaller lots, but they own their own land. And I think that gives people an entry-level housing product that they can build generational wealth with, opposed to a stick-built single-family home.
So those are.
That makes sense. We had a similar suggestion recently.
Commissioner?
The only thought I had was that we have properties that are not well-maintained, and you apparently have a list of them. I wondered if those people who can't afford to maintain their properties, if there's a way, if there's an instrument where the city can acquire the property, giving a life estate to the residents. And therefore, that property then becomes city-owned and can be worked with later on.
Thank you, Counselor.
And nothing at the time from the dais.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you so much. My initial thoughts are just that I guess I kind of hooked onto the infill ideas, and I know the city can't force citizens or anybody to do things, but I would be interested to know what kind of measures we can take to encourage developers, and even, regional and local developers. We talk a lot about the economy of our town, and of course, when we have larger developers come in that are not as invested in this area and bring, non-incremental funding to these projects, a lot of that money leaves. So I guess something I would like to see is how can we talk about encouraging people that are here to help solve this problem.
Thank you. Commissioner Murray?
I guess my question would be, as a professional here, where would you point in the United States that is doing this really well? Where would you point globally that is doing this really well? For later.
Okay.
Nobody's doing it perfectly, but there are some
Perfect,
successes.
Thank you, Counselor Peralta.
I have no comments, thank you.
Commissioner?
Like Councilor Garvin, I'm curious about the existing mobile home situations and what is allowed or not allowed to encourage the more permanent situations where homes are built on land that's zoned.
Thank you. Can you end the screen share so I can see the attendees, Counselor?
Thank you, Mayor. To both Commissioner McClellan's point and Council President Garvin's point, Horizon Homeowners Cooperative comes to mind out on Booth Bend. It was a manufactured home subdivision that became a cooperative and is one of the best maintained subdivisions probably in the city. So generational wealth and pride of ownership. So related to the manufactured housing.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Counselor.
I have two thoughts. One I brought out during the budget session, that there are places in the United States, the Sun Belt, and even in San Diego of all places, where they're building apartments, and they're building a lot of them, and they actually have reduced rents. And it's something to give some consideration to. I know it's not the ultimate ideal, but it's better than having people on the streets. The other thing is I'd like people to consider, and this is in planning as we speak, and it's something the Affordable Housing Committee's looked at, because we have a 4-year backlog of people waiting to get into something, is transitional housing. I think it can be done right. The problem is getting landowners to do it and where to put them. Not entirely happy with the way the Planning Commission's going on the particular concept of land use, but I think it's something that definitely time has come, and we need it in McMinnville.
Thank you. And Counselor Chenoweth, we'll go to you on Zoom.
Thank you, Mayor. I think rather than finding alternative streams of revenue gained predominantly from taxing our residents to fix a problem that was created by the legislature some 50 years ago with SB 100 and the ongoing scarcity of land that we now are facing as a result. I mean, I've been told recently that a lot of land is beginning at $225,000 to $230,000 in McMinnville. Even if we put a manufactured home upon that, it's still not within the affordability of somebody making $65,000 a year for household income. So I would say, rather than doing the first portion, and rather than putting pressure on cities to fix this problem on behalf of the legislature, that the real solution to the problem is in the hands of the legislature to fix this scarcity of land that they've created. That's the ultimate problem. That's the real solution. And until we focus on making them fix that, we're going to continue to have this problem, and it's going to continue to escalate.
All right, thank you so much. I'll save my additional suggestions for later since we're late and late. So I'll now end the work session at 7:03 p.m. Thank you so much for coming in. I apologize to everybody here that we're going to start the council meeting just 2 minutes late, but we have been sitting here for a while, so we are going to take a very quick break. If everybody could try to be back within 2 minutes, I would greatly appreciate it. And apologies to those at home.
Thank you.
Listen with the best of them.
audience back to their seats. We will try to get started here momentarily.
Recording in progress.
Thank you. I'm just looking for a few more counselors here to get started, please. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. Daniel, can you let me into the Zoom room? Because if Chris and I are in there, we can start. Great, wonderful, thank you. Making sure. Oh. There we go. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your patience and giving us a little bit of a pause there. I would like to call to order the September 10th, 2024 regular business meeting of the McMinnville City Council at 7:07 p.m. And I would ask Daniel Ruiz to do a roll call.
Counselor Geary.
Good evening.
Counselor Menke.
Present.
Counselor Chenoweth. He is on Zoom. Counselor Peralta.
Here.
Counselor Payne.
Here.
Council President Garvin.
He is taking a, he is here for the record. He'll be right back.
And Mayor Dropkin.
I am here as well, for the record. Thank you so much. Counselor Peralta, would you do us the honor of leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance? If you're able, please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. Happy to start this evening with a proclamation. And our proclamation today is the designation of September 15th to October 15th as Latinx Heritage Month. Whereas National Latinx Heritage Month celebrates the Latinx community and highlights its countless achievements, and whereas the observation began in 1968 as Hispanics Heritage Week under President Lyndon B. Johnson and was enacted into federal law on August 17, 1988, calling upon the people of the United States to observe this time with ceremonies, activities, and programs, and whereas many Latinx Americans trace their roots to the cultures of indigenous peoples of the Americas, including the Arawaks, the Aztecs, the Incas, the Maya, and the Taínos, and some trace their roots to ancestors from Spain, Mexico, the Caribbean, Central and South America, and Africa. And whereas September 15th to October 15th is recognized as National Hispanic Heritage Month, a time to honor and celebrate the invaluable ways Latinxes contribute to McMinnville's common goals, to celebrate a diverse Latinx culture, and to work toward a stronger and more inclusive society for all. And whereas the 15th of September is significant as a starting date for Latinx Heritage Month because the anniversary of independence from Spain for Costa Rica, El Salvador, and Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. Mexico and Chile celebrate their independence on September 16th and 18th, respectively. And whereas Latinxes are a significant part of McMinnville's population and influence the fabric of our community with contributions to McMinnville's arts, businesses, restaurants, civic leadership, education, and overall culture. Now, therefore, I, Remy Drabkin, Mayor of the City of McMinnville, do hereby proclaim the period between September 15th and October 15th, 2024 as Latinx Heritage Month, and in witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand this 10th day of September in the year 2024. Usually people applaud. Unfortunately, we don't have somebody to, we don't have an organization here to representatively hand this off to you tonight, but we appreciate the applause nonetheless. We are now going to have a presentation. Thank Recology for returning tonight for our continued conversations and for coming back with this presentation addressing many of the questions of the council. I would call on our Public Works Director, Jeff Hunsaker, to introduce. Is Jeff in here? He's right there. Oh, you're over there. Thank you.
All right, yeah, so we talked about a couple of council meetings ago that we were going to have Ecology come back up for a presentation and to discuss with the city council about some options for service, specifically at the direction of the mayor around the collection service. And so they're here to talk about some of those things and what possibilities there could be. And the council can kind of ask questions and set some priorities of what they'd like to see.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity again to come in front of you. We've got just a few slides, maybe 28, to get through. But I want to do a couple introductions really quickly. We have Dan Blue, who you've all met. Nick Olheiser runs our compost facilities. I've asked him to join us today. And then we have Ernie, who you guys remember, Ernie Martin. We have Amy LeCoq, our regional compliance or regional environmental manager. And then we have Cade Kleinstuber, who has joined us as our new Waste Zero specialist that we've promised. So what we did after we left this last council meeting is we went around and we talked to a few folks, including the Zero Waste McMinnville team. We sat down with Ramsey and Jerry from the Plastic Project, Charlene from Edible Landscapes, and then we had some conversations with Selah from Chapul. We invited some council members to come out to the site to do a tour so they can get a feel for the site. Thank you, Councilman Garvin, Gary, and Mankey. I appreciate you guys coming out. I know the others, we tried to get you out there. Everybody's busy, we get it. So I still would like to extend you guys an open invitation to come out, not just to the transfer station, but maybe to our new state-of-the-art facility in North Plains to look at the compost there, because that will come up in tonight's presentation about alternative ways to handle or to take in more food waste. All right. Sure. We'll go to the next slide.
Where do I point?
Oh.
Okay, there we go.
All right, so as a result of those invitations and the result of our outreach, really diversion came up as the main top. Can you all hear me okay? Or do I need to get a little closer?
That's better.
Yeah,
That'll make it easier for those at home, too.
Yeah, sorry about that. So what we learned mostly from our time with council members and with Zero Waste and the Chapul folks, and really what we've known to be existing programs that can be implemented, was diversion as the topic. And so what we'd like to do is present you with some service options and their impact on diversion. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dan, and he'll go through those options with you. Okay?
After the next slide. You're going to do this one.
And so I'm going to turn it back over to myself because we rehearsed this so well. So what I want you to do is I want to do a quick alignment and get you some perspective on the site. So on the top left is the collection facility. So if you see all those white little objects, those are the trucks. We have a maintenance facility, and then we house our admin and our driver room and dispatch off of that section. If you go to the far right and you look at the big building with the white roof, that's the transfer station and the recycling center, so the public is there. You can see even the cars queued up, so a fair amount of cars will line up there. That'll be something I want to revisit when we start looking at some of the things we do at the transfer station and the impacts that may have. And then off to the left is the compost facility. This is windrow compost facility. We'll get into more of the details there, but we also have retail there. You see the green tent, the tops of the tents. We have, we'll sell the product, the compost product there, but it's kind of a one-stop shopping for the residents because we have rock and other bark that we bring in and wholesale, and we'll sell retail. So it's utilized quite often and quite well. It gets a lot of use. All right. The other thing you would need to know is that there's about 80 employees in this 3 facilities combined: drivers, operators, mechanics, CSRs, our admin folks, and our finance team are all housed there. All right, now I would like to turn it over to Dan to discuss some options.
Okay, sorry. Well, it's the right button, I think. Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Nice to see you. Thanks for having us here tonight. And thanks, Chris, for setting that up for me. So as you recall, when we came before you in July for the annual rate review, we received feedback on a number of topics, including service standards, reporting, collection service options, and some topics related to the McMinnville transfer station. So following that meeting, we provided a system improvement memo to council that further framed those issues. And at council's request, we will focus our presentation tonight on the collection system. And this would include program service options, including food scraps collection, dry waste and construction and demolition debris waste collection, as well as some other topics related to additional waste diversion. So we will return to council in January to continue this discussion with a focus on potential investments at the transfer station and at our compost facility here at McMinnville. So the goal tonight again is to provide you with a range of potential new collection service options, answer your questions, and hear from you about which options you'd like to explore further. So once we have direction from council on which services you'd like to prioritize, we will come back with detailed upfront and ongoing program cost estimates, as well as potential rate impacts for various services. Next slide, please. Okay, so in order to assess the various collection service options, we have provided a really simplistic set of criteria to consider as we go through the options that we'll present tonight. We understand and share the city's interest in diverting additional materials from the landfill-bound waste stream for a variety of sustainability reasons. Less waste is good, less environmental impact associated with that waste, lower greenhouse gas emissions, etc. So the diversion criteria indicates whether the option has the potential to deliver low, medium, or high levels of diversion. The rate impact criteria focuses on the cost associated with the implementation of different options. Low would indicate that there would be low impact to ratepayers, for example. Additional costs may include capital investments, and everything from carts all the way up through facility upgrades. Transportation costs, processing fees, and education and outreach efforts, all to explain new services and also to reduce contamination. The implementation feasibility is the third criterion, and this reflects how easy or quickly we would be able to roll out additional services. This includes consideration of acquiring additional equipment, developing outreach materials, monitoring contamination, en route all the way up to significant capital improvements. Let's see. This also includes some assessment of how long it will take to roll out new services. Some options may be easily accomplished within 3 to 6 months, while others may require modifications to our conditional use permit, our solid waste permit, and could include engineering and construction, which, as you know, takes a long time, 2 to 5 years possibly. Next slide. Okay, so these are the 4 options that we're going to present, and these all focus on food waste. And this is focusing on capturing additional food scraps from the landfill-bound waste stream. There's 4 options to consider. 2 of them are residential focused, the first 2, and 2 of them are commercial focused. And I just want to point out they are not mutually exclusive, and we will drill down on each of these in coming slides, so you don't have to memorize them. I do want to mention that we're focused on the collection side of our McMinnville-based operations, but depending on the options chosen, there would be potential impacts to the composting facility that would need to be taken into consideration. So we do address the where does it go question in the coming slides. Next slide. Okay. So this is the first option. The first food scraps option would be to allow residential customers to place vegetative food scraps that are generated from within their kitchens into their existing yard debris carts. This would include all vegetative foods that grow. So we use the term, if it grows, it goes. We would roll out a public education campaign to promote the new service, maybe consider providing kitchen scrap bins to collect those vegetative food scraps, and develop a monitoring framework for providing feedback to customers regarding contamination, and also to measure diversion impacts from the program. We estimate that this option would help the city divert approximately 1% to 2% more material from the landfill-bound waste stream, and this estimate is based on other program rollouts that we have been involved in, what we see in our compost facilities which handle this material, like the North Plains site, as well as Oregon DEQ waste composition data and food scrap studies. Because of the likely increase in contamination we'd think there would be some rate impacts due to increased public education and outreach, as well as increased monitoring and management on-site at our compost facility. Implementation on the collection side would be relatively easy because residents already have their yard debris carts. So we list that as a medium for implementation, however, for those same reasons that I talked about before, which would be education costs, increased monitoring, et cetera. Next slide. So option 2, this also focuses on residential food scraps. This would expand to include all food scraps, inclusive of meat, bones, dairy, prepared foods, in addition to those vegetative food scraps. Again, this would go into the existing yard debris cart. A recent DEQ study indicates that there are about 2.3 to 2.9 pounds of food waste generated per capita in Oregon from residential customers. Because of this, we estimate we could divert an additional 3 to 5% of the overall waste stream by adding this service. Rate impacts would be considered higher because of the necessary and significant capital upgrades at the compost facility to manage for odors, leachate, vector control, et cetera. This option would also require expanded education, contamination reduction, I feel like I'm repeating myself, monitoring, and a feedback loop to those customers who participate. So we do manage this stream currently at our North Plains facility, and we see quite a bit more contamination in this all-inclusive food scrap program than if it was just straight yard debris. So I do want to point out that while our McMinnville compost facility is currently permitted to accept this material, it is not engineered to do so. So I'll turn it over to Nick to talk about where the material would go post-collection for both option 1 and option 2.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for having us here tonight. As Dan pointed out, now that he's kind of teed up the first 2 options, which do primarily revolve around residential food waste, I want to talk a little bit about if we were to proceed with one of these programs, where would that material ultimately go at the end of the day? Sticking with option 1, again, this is residential food scraps, vegetative only. Within this option, currently right now, we would be able to accept that material at our Ecology Organics McMinnville facility. We're permitted and we're engineered to accept this style of feedback, if you will, or feedstock, if you will, at that site. Jumping to option 2, this is the residential food scraps all-inclusive. This is including meat and dairy, essentially anything from your home kitchen. If we were to proceed with bringing this material to Ecology Organics McMinnville, as Dan alluded to, while we're permitted, we're not engineered for that material yet. The meat and dairy and other components of this program do bring additional challenges that we would want to address with infrastructure upgrades. We would introduce technology that is at our North Plains facility and our Almsville facility right now, aerated static pile systems, mass beds, biofilters, remote technology, monitoring capabilities, all these things that we can ensure that we're doing it responsibly at the end of the day. There is another avenue for option 2 if it was not to go to Ecology Organics McMinnville, and that would be to bring that material direct off route to our McMinnville transfer station. That could involve some expansion efforts at the transfer station to accommodate these tons on our tip floor. It's pretty tight as it is out there right now, so we might want to increase the amount of space available for us to tip that material. That material could then be reloaded into 53-foot trailers and then transported down to our Recology Organics Almsville facility, which, like its sister up in North Plains, has the aeration capability technology already implemented. Everything's ready to go. It's permitted and engineered for this style of material, if you will. Next slide. This is a quick overview of our North Plains facility. It's quite a bit more robust in terms of size and capabilities and the technology that we've introduced over the last really 12 years. It's kind of been a long effort for us, but it's now our golden goose, if you will, of a composting site. We're doing 80,000 tons per year of the residential type 3 food scraps, all-inclusive food scraps at this facility. We have robust blowers. We have 4 100 horsepower blowers that you can kind of see somewhat there, the green style blowers there by the pile of wood chips. We have biofiltration technology to where we're able to pull air down through that material and discharge it through a biofilter similar to what you'd see at a wastewater treatment plant. Make sure that we're doing things responsibly, ethically for our neighbors around us, as well as just visitors that might be in the area as well.
Thanks, Nick. Do want to share that there's a high school, a brand new high school right next to and neighborhood right next to our compost facility, and we don't really get any complaints anymore except for one neighbor who complains every month, I think. Okay, so we're going to switch gears from food waste and switch over to, we're switching gears from residential food waste over to commercial food scraps collection options. And the next 2 options are only for food generating businesses and does not include services at multifamily complexes. So option 3 focuses only on pre-consumer food scraps. So think of a food manufacturer, food processor, who would likely have homogeneous food scraps coming out of their facility. We'd offer to collect this feedstock in roll-off boxes or front-load containers. Option 3 would not include restaurants, coffee shops, cafes, school cafeterias, etc. This would be a relatively small portion of the marketplace, and so we don't anticipate it moving the needle on diversion very much. There would be rate impacts here because of post-collection processing costs, increased education, monitoring, etc., as we saw with the other options. Implementation, we peg at low or relatively easy to implement from a collection standpoint, as we already have the ability to provide that service through containers, and also because of the likely small number of businesses that would be able to participate in this. Depending on where the material was sent to, the rate and implementation impacts could be higher than we list here. This feedstock would likely be compatible, by the way, with Chapul's projected feedstock, which were described to us just last week as commercial pre-consumer food scraps that are homogeneous byproducts designated by individual producers. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about pre-consumer food waste options. Next slide. There you go. So this is an expanded version of that. This is commercial food scraps, all inclusive. This would focus on the commercial sector and would allow restaurants, cafeterias, commercial food manufacturing businesses, cafes, coffee shops, etc., to sign up for food scrap collection services. This would be back of the house only, so only food scraps generated in the kitchens and prep areas, not plate scrapings from consumers, post-consumer. This material stream would include meat, dairy, prepared foods, vegetative waste, etc. So we think this would move the needle quite a bit in terms of diversion. It also would come with a higher rate impact due to the need for new equipment, curbside, bins for inside the kitchen areas, robust education, outreach, monitoring, contamination efforts, I should have an acronym for that, and also require significant investment in a McMinnville compost facility to be able to manage this material. I'll turn it back over to Nick to talk about where will it go issues.
Thank you, Dan. So these 2 options are going to have a very similar avenue of where they might be able to travel as option 2. Sticking with option 3 first, if that material was to be brought to the Recology Organics McMinnville facility, those infrastructure upgrades, as we spoke about, similar to what we've done at North Plains over the years, would have to be implemented at that site before this material could be brought to that facility. There is another avenue for option 3 as well. We would be able to direct haul off route to Chapul Farms, because this is a pre-consumer feedstock, as long as it's a consistent, clean product for them that would fit in their system. That's something that we could look at as well. There is also another alternative within option 3 for the direct haul. We would direct haul off route to our transfer station. We would have to make necessary improvements for expansion of the building to accept this material, space and different things, different considerations like that. That material can then be reloaded into a 53-foot trailer and transported to our Recology or Almsville facility that we spoke of in option 2. Very similar approach for option 4. If we were to bring it to McMinnville, necessary upgrades and infrastructure improvements would have to be made for us to accept that, or we could bring it to the transfer station direct off route, reload that material, and then haul it down to our Recology Organics Almsville facility.
Okay, so this slide intends to kind of take a pause and wrap up the food waste service collection options. I do want to point out again that these options are not mutually exclusive. You could direct us to further explore option 1, for example, and option 3, and come back to you with more detailed planning, cost estimates, and rate impact estimates if that is the direction that you would like us to go. At the end of the presentation, I'll show these options again. So let's move on to the next section, please. Next slide.
You know, we probably will want to ask questions. Typically, this council likes to address things as they come up, at least give them an opportunity. Just going around the room, start with you, Council President.
I guess it seems like option 2 and option 4 need to be ran in parallel because they require the same amount of investment or the same philosophical decision to truck recycling waste and pay for diesel and wear and tear on roads and everything else. So I don't know if we're really diverting food waste, if we're really moving the needle for the environment, if we're just going to truck that an hour and a half away. So if there's some metric you guys could bring back with that, as far as this is what the capital investment would be to do it here, this is what it's going to impact your ratepayers, and this is what it would be to put some more Kenworths on the road and 53-foot trailers going down to Almsville. I think that would be something for council to consider. It sounds like it'll be after I'm gone from the dais, but I think having the full picture in front of council with numbers would help them arrive at a decision.
So if I can recap really quick, so in favor of doing some investment here so we don't have to truck, but also I think you're asking what would the impact net be if we did truck it versus investment? Is that
correct? Yeah.
Okay.
So, you know, I personally would rather have the investment done here, but at what cost is that versus just trucking it? And then if we were going to truck it, is there really any net environmental positive impact versus just letting it go to the dump on the same truck it goes in right now versus creating a whole new trucking system to truck food waste?
Yeah.
That feels good that we're recycling it, but it's really doing nothing for the environment because you're spending all the fuel and diesel and tires and everything else that comes with trucking food waste.
Yeah, what's nice about the program is if it's here, it's closed loop. The product stays here, it gets processed here, and then we sell it from here, right? So to your point, and if I can address that, if we do 1 and 3 together, I get that. Sometimes it's phased in because it can be overwhelming to do both at the same time. So if we do that type of infrastructure work, it does make sense to go ahead and do 3 as well. But, you know, we might come back and say, hey, let's start with residential, get it up and running, make sure our process is good, and then pull in the commercial, because it is a different profile. It's got a lot more wet waste in it than we would see from a residential program. It's just straight up food in a cart versus mixed with yard debris. So I heard you right there, right? Okay.
Yeah, that 1 and 3 parallel together, and so does 2 and 4. It's not really like you want to do 1 and 4 because the capital investment doesn't make a pencil.
Yep, makes sense.
And I'm going to go to the Zoom screen real quick, just because sometimes I lose track of it, especially when I can't see faces. So Councilor Chenoweth?
I really don't have anything to add. Thank you, Mayor, for giving me an opportunity. Am I frozen?
Yes, but we can hear your voice, and it is not frozen. Thank you. We will go to Councilor Gary.
In agreement with Councilor Garvin, I would just add to the information you brought back. With that investment in that upgraded system, my understanding too would be you would require more product than the city of McMinnville can deliver to you to make that increasingly financially viable. So we would need to capture out of city of McMinnville product to bring that in to make it a viable venture for you. So I'd be interested to see what that additional offset is of trucking and other people's, and what that impact would be to them as well. So, because I know being the big player in the game, we're here to represent the taxpayers and customers of the city of McMinnville, but your depth and breadth affects more than just that, so.
Right, so, and you and I spoke a little bit about this when we toured, and I brought it up because if we build this type of investment, we're going to build it to take the more tons because we want to future-proof it, right? And then if we can bring more customer base in to spread those costs across, that helps drive the cost down here. So it is an option that we bring in some food waste from other areas. And I know that's a concern. I know that was a concern when the transfer station expanded. Hey, we don't want to bring in tons from Metro. That's trash. This is a little bit different. This is compost. It's going to have a second life, a third life to it. It's got a reuse a piece to it that's a little more appealing than bringing in trash from other cities. So that is a good point. So I think you want me to look at, in addition to what Councilman Garvin was saying, look at the impact of what is that trucking also if we have to bring it in from outside, and then possibly the rate impact.
Yeah.
Okay.
And without getting too into the specifics of the science and fallout of each of these, the food scrap portion is part of the would be part of the composting program, which is the free yard debris drop-off. It would be that pile and the windrows, and that's that process of, right, I bring my stuff, I drop it off into the pile, it becomes part of the windrows, and then the windrows become part of what you sell back to, right? It would be in that process.
Yeah, I'll let Nick speak to that because we do need to blend that wet food waste with some fibrous material, I believe is what you're asking as well.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand that this would be where we would see that happen at your facility, is in that composting.
We would incorporate it in, yeah.
It would be adding food to that pile.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Correct, yeah. So if we were to move forward with one of these programs, that material would become part of that pile. It would go through that grinding process that we talked about and then enter the windrow system as the system currently is. Now, if we were to start adding food waste, we talked about the infrastructure upgrades. It wouldn't be quite a windrow style system. Our aerated static pile systems are more pods or zones that sit on top of essentially it acts like a big air hockey table. Little spar drip holes poke up through the asphalt, connected to blowers, and we're able to push or pull air through that material. So that's what the makeup and kind of the structure of the process would look like. It's one important thing to point out. While it would be getting dropped into the yard debris pile that is currently predominantly made up of the free yard debris drop off from residents, this program is part of the collection piece of it as well. So it wouldn't be necessarily self-haul into the free pile, so it would be tied to the collection portion of it as well.
Okay, and so when you bring this back to us, information on these options, I'd love to hear more data and user statistics on usage of that pile by people in the town.
With regarding to how it is working now.
Correct, yeah. What's going into that pile? How is it being used and by whom?
We could talk about that now if you like. I mean, we have some of those.
I think we only have so much time, unless it's, yeah. Just as part of that, I think it's more important as part of that conversation around implementing this. I'd love to understand who and what degree is getting put into that pile.
Gotcha. I'm hearing you. Okay.
The additional trucking metric that Councilor Geary brought up, that would be good for council to know is when you're future-proofing this facility and you need to bring in the additional tonnage, how many daily or annual truck trips are needed to be inbound to the city that are going to be wear and tear on our city roads and reduce our CPI index or our pavement index.
Sure. Well, we could approximate the truckloads to your point.
Another element of this that I'm curious about is when I was out there, we were discussing capacity issues. So I'm assuming that if we're going to start trucking it in from other sources, we may have capacity issues too. How will that figure into the rate increases?
So when you say capacity, do you mean
We need
to
more space.
process trash or to process compost?
Well, probably a little of both. I mean, the conversation will continue, but at least for the composting, my impression is that you may need more room.
So yeah, yes, we will. It will, it's going to grow just like the trash volumes are growing. Especially if we're going to target diversion, it's going to come out of that increased trash, and so we'll see those. We should see that. That's the hope that will climb. So we'll design it in such a way that it's 20 years out in terms of hitting capacity, but we'd fill it to that engineered capacity with other tons, and then as McMinnville grows, those other tons that we were bringing in would go somewhere else. So we would flex those tons out, if that makes sense.
So in other words, you'd hit a certain capacity and it would go somewhere else.
We would build it out to, a 20-year capacity for just McMinnville. But day one, if we open it up and turn it on, we would fill it with other tons so that we could help keep that rate down. And as McMinnville grows over the next 20 to 30 years to fill that capacity, we would push out those additional tons that were coming in from outside.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
And then if we come, if it grows bigger than we thought, we'd come back and say, hey, you guys are growing too fast.
All right,
This question will come up again.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
Yeah, let's keep going around the table here. Councilor Peralta.
Thank you, Mayor. Where do we currently truck the solid waste from McMinnville to?
Can you use your microphone a little more closely?
Good. Where do we currently truck the solid waste from MAC to?
This goes to Coffin Butte landfill outside of Corvallis.
And how long is that a viable?
It's a really good question. They are in the process of looking at another 10 to 15-year expansion. It could go either way at this point. They say they have another 10 to 11 years currently, and they're working on an expansion that gives them another 10 to 15.
So if that expansion didn't happen, where would you ship? What would be the next place?
So we would come back to you and provide you where landfills have capacity currently and future capacity for us. Right now, there's a landfill in Cowlitz County, a headquarters landfill just outside of Longview. That's an option. It's a smaller county-owned landfill. And then the rest of them are in the gorge. It's the three big ones from Waste Management, Waste Connections, and Republic. It's all trucking. You can barge or you can put it on rail. We talked a little bit to some of our visitors about rail. Rail is an option, but you have to have a lot of trash because the railroad really demands that you have it so that they'll come get it, and sometimes they don't come and get it, so you're stuck. So we are right on a rail spur. It looks like a great option for us, but we only do 7 to 8 loads a day right now of trucks, and that will maybe fill 3 rail cars. So it's not a viable option, in my experience, to get the railroad to come and pick up those once a week or once a day.
On the main point of this, I tend to share the questions that Councilor Garvin and Geary brought up. I think that 2 and 4 pair better just from the economics of it, and 1 and 3 probably do as well. So I'd be interested in seeing kind of a short and long-term sketched out plan on what either of those 2 options might look like in terms of the impact on ratepayers and benefit to the community. And I appreciate the outreach to Chapool Farms. So, yeah, thank you for.
Yeah, with Chapool, we're sort of we're on the same course, and eventually we're going to cross where we can work and bring them tons. But we're not there yet, but we are chatting with them. We're having those conversations as they evolve through that process as well.
Thank you.
Councilor Payne?
Thank you, Mayor. My only question is really down to reconciling these, well, I guess burdens, so to speak, compared to the financial incentive that Recology will gain. Like, you sell your compost right now, so there's so I guess my concern would be, is this rate, specifically to 2 and 4, is this rate impact high, reconciling with the financial benefit of Recology performing this service?
Yeah, we will factor in the cost of the product going out, if that's what you're asking, the revenue side of the product.
On the retail side, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm in favor of seeing more information on 2 and 4 and share the sentiments of the other 3's gone so far.
Thank you. Councilor Menke?
I already asked my question.
Okay. I have a couple questions. You mentioned, just a moment ago, that eventually you can see yourself hauling directly to Chipool Farms, and you had specifically called that out in option 3. What does eventually mean? And if your hauling was to go directly to Chipool, then would it not decrease or eliminate the need for any changes at your own facility? And do you know the timeline when that could be feasible? So it's kind of the first part of the question, and I won't ask all 6 parts at once.
Yeah, no worries. So Chipool is in the process of working on getting a place to process, and they would get permitted for pre-consumer only. So that would limit their ability to take the all-inclusive. And
So, right, so I think what I'm saying is that in option 3, you mentioned that you would take this now to your facility. You would need, is it correct, you would need some modification? I didn't make a note on modification on that. Yeah, you need some modification. But then you also said that in the future, but kind of, to me, unclear, 6 months, 6 years future, in the future, Chipool will have their own facility that you could haul to. Is that correct?
Why don't we have Nick take the first part, and I'll come wrap around on the Chipool part.
Yeah, so when we were discussing ultimately where it would go, and we kind of laid out the slide that had the 2 options, we were kind of giving 2 options that we could pick one of, essentially. So if it was to go to McMinnville Organics here, we would have to make those necessary improvements at the site to be able to accommodate that. If it was to go to Chipool, that could be a direct haul off of a route, essentially. And then Dan, I know you want to talk a little bit.
So when I spoke with Chipool last week, what they described to me is that they were meeting with Oregon DEQ either this week or next to start their solid waste permit application process. And from personal experience, and I think others here have experience with, that can take quite a long time. It could be 2 years. They are hoping to open their doors in 2 years-ish. I kind of drilled down with them about this. Pre-consumer food waste, homogeneous pre-consumer food waste only from, food manufacturers. They're not envisioning anything from restaurants, cafes, that sort of thing at all, cafeterias. In their initial opening phase, which they thought would be about 2 to 3 years, they would like to expand their ability to take broader feedstocks after that initial phase of 2 to 3 years of operating. So that's sort of the timeline horizon with them. A lot of that is dependent on how quickly they can get a permit.
Okay, and did you have conversations, and I understand what I'm about to say, so please don't take offense, because, you'll understand. But did you have conversation with them about allowing them to do their own hauling? And I ask that because while I understand, of course, you would want to protect your franchise with the city, and I understand that aspect of it, I think many of these things that have come up, whether it's food waste or construction waste, it's not that there are not those services available, it's that you don't offer those services. And so my question isn't really only about Chipool, although I'm interested specifically in Chipool, but also following this kind of broader dialogue with the city, have you had that conversation, and could you talk to us about your thinking around that so that we can know what that is as we're trying to meet our citizens' needs?
Yeah, so very early on, we spoke with Chapul about just collection, right? That's what we do. If we were going to collect it, we're already set up with the infrastructure, the carts, the service at levels at all the businesses and the homes. We said, hey, once you become permitted facility for us to dump at, then we will bring it to you if it's a product that you can use, right? And so as it's evolved, we said we also wouldn't get in the way of them doing the collection that they're doing now so that they could get a startup going and figure out what types of food waste work best for them. And so they're doing it on a small scale, 5-gallon buckets collection. We didn't want to get in the way of that because we wanted to see them succeed in that. And so our conversations with them have been when you start to scale up, then that's when our paths will cross. And if there's a collection program that's in conflict with the franchise, then we would sit down and have that conversation about here's what we can do, here's what you can do. And this has statewide implications for franchise agreements for collection of food waste. So we haven't got there yet. You'll see some of that concern that you have on the C&D side in these next slides, and we'll do some clarifying there because I know there's been some confusion around who can collect what and how.
Okay, I have a couple more on this. We talked about collections, and we were looking for, when we had this brief conversation in here last time, before you came back with this, we talked about kind of what could we do, what could you add that's easiest, like what would be the next natural step or the next thing that you could do that would not be difficult to do, right? And that's my understanding of the focus on food. But I also see that the only high impact one actually does have a high impact on implementation and high impact on rates, not even knowing what that high, medium, low means.
Right.
So it kind of brings me back to the question of, is this the easiest and most high impact route that you could be pursuing to help us increase our diversion?
Yeah, I think that's the pain point here for all of us, right? Is if we're going to target programs that are going to have better diversion, there's some expense associated with that. And there's some upfront costs, but with the type of franchise agreement we have, it allows those expenses to be stretched out over some years as well. So when we say high to the rate impact, that could be 10%. So per home, that might be $2 more to add food. But we'll look at those, and I'm throwing numbers out. Don't hold me to those, but we'll look at that compared to what we see at other programs that are out there now. So it's out there for us to see, and we can look at it. We don't want to try to scare you into saying, hey, agree to this high price and let's do this. Our goal is to just say, hey, there's some risk that this could be more expensive.
Okay, and I remember when we made a number of changes a couple of years ago when our solid waste started being hauled elsewhere. I don't remember if it was to Coffin Butte, but I do remember specifically that wherever it was being hauled, or I shouldn't say I remember specifically, I strongly recall that where it was being hauled had 150-year capacity. And so I'm wondering kind of what's happened over the last couple of years that we were hauling someplace that we didn't have to worry about capacity, and now that's an issue that's back before us.
Well, so I wasn't there and I don't recall. Do you have a recollection of that? So I can look into that one for you, but I will tell you that landfills sometimes will overstate the life of their landfills because they have the property, but they may not have it permitted. They may not have the cell built, so they'll say we have 150. But if it was in that 100 range, most of those are in the gorge. Like all three of those are in the 100-year range. I have never heard that Coffin Butte was in that range, so I can look back into that. But
well, it's not specifically about that. That was just, you remember numbers.
So that'll be in Carl's first rate review presentation, and we paid a little bit more for a rate to haul trash up to Washington I believe it was at Cowlitz Place, but in that same presentation, he mentioned that Arlington had a 100-year.
Yeah, that's in the gorge, correct. Yeah. That's the waste management
management
facility in Arlington.
Okay, and then my last one before we move on is I understand from the conversation that happened here is that with any of these options, they're not actually economically viable. They'll all have a rate impact, and you'll have to bring in refuse from other areas in order to justify the cost.
So bringing in refuse, I would say the compost from other areas.
Okay, the compost.
Yeah, that's an option if you allow it, then it would help with the impact of the rate, because we could spread that cost over more tons, if that makes sense. So more customers, essentially. So that's an option. And if we're going to build for capacity, similar to what Councilmember Mankey was saying, it allows us to build the capacity, but we could fill it with other tons and would help alleviate that rate pressure. And then as you guys grow, those tons, we just don't accept them anymore, and it's McMinnville's tons.
So what you're saying is that even if we went just with option one, our easiest option, lowest diversion, which the bins are there, it's changing habits, so I think it's primarily education.
Yeah.
Which I am curious how a program that's primarily education has a medium range rate impact. But assuming, let's say we gave you that direction that we wanted to see, would anything you come back with include bringing in compost from outside city limits in order to hit in this, whatever this medium rate impact is?
So for option one, we wouldn't be promoting bringing in others.
So that would only be for the other options, or which option would be?
So if we're going to invest in infrastructure, so that would be option two, and option four. And potentially three, yeah, based on the feedstock.
Okay, thank you.
And, I think if you want, what we'll do, when we have some more time, then we'll try to put a rate range in there for you, and maybe that'll be easier to explain or digest, if you will, or compost, if you will, with regards to how we've declared medium and high and low, right?
Sounds great.
Okay.
All right.
So I just want to clarify. So that there was a few questions. I don't know if I got them all down, but my
I didn't have any takeaway questions. I didn't have anything I'm asking you to come back with. Thank you. And let's move on.
Thank you. Next slide, somebody who has the clicker. That'd be you, Chris. Okay, so we are switching gears at this point from food scraps over to dry waste and commercial and demolition debris service options. I'm going to use C&D going forward. So to clarify, that we included the larger category of dry waste because we think there is opportunity to divert more materials from the landfill-bound waste stream by going a bit further upstream with dry waste than just C&D. So dry waste is a bigger category. C&D is a subcomponent of dry waste. So when you think about dry waste, you could also think about materials coming out of a big box home remodeling store. Some stores generate a lot of waste that is dry that doesn't have putrescible food waste in it. It's like a remodeling store or a retail store. C&D would be considered a subset of dry waste, and for this material stream, there are two options that focus on job site sorting. So those are very relevant to the C&D sector. And then there are two options that focus on sorting at our facility or another facility, and that would include other sources than just C&D material. So if we were going to invest in our facility, for example, to create a space to sort these materials, we think it makes sense to add that broader category of dry waste to that service option. Again, like Chris said earlier, help spread the cost across more tons of material, and you get the benefit of getting more diversion as well than just if you look at C&D. Okay, so let's drill down to the options. Next slide, please. So option one would be for Recology to provide contractors with a set of individual bins so that the contractors themselves would be able to sort their materials on site. This would include cardboard, metal, mixed materials like plastics, and also one for garbage. This program would allow for weighing and reporting back of the different materials diverted from the construction project for LEED or Sustainable Building Certification or other similar programs. We pegged diversion option to be low overall, since we do not think there would be a lot of job sites that would use this service due to a number of reasons, including space constraints and also potential costs. Since this involves delivering multiple containers on site, there would be additional costs, so we would put the rate impact at medium on this one. Implementation we put at medium, though that depends really on how many contractors would elect to utilize this service and whether we have to procure additional containers. Again, these low, medium, high are very preliminary, just to get a sense of where council is thinking about what we should come back to with more specific cost estimates and other estimates. Next slide. There it is. So this is kind of mocked up, but this is kind of what it could look like for a construction site. The bins on the left would be labeled for different types of materials, and the truck on the right is the vehicle that we'd use to deliver it. We could also look at some other investments in a flatbed with different containers. So there are options here, but this is just to illustrate what that first option looks like. Next slide. So option two would have contractors piling up all of their construction waste on site, and then Recology coming on to the job site to load out the C&D materials, either sorting them into separate containers on a flatbed trailer or taking them to a facility for on-site sorting. So depending on how the material is collected from the job site, we could potentially provide material diversion reporting similar to what I described in option one. This service would be convenient for contractors, suitable to small to large projects, depending on how much space they have at their job site. Rate impacts would be higher due to labor costs and more significantly due to capital investments we need to make at the transfer station to allow room for sorting. That is, again, if we sorted it at our facility. Implementation timeline could be long due to those capital improvements. If materials were sorted at the transfer station, we'd likely be able to report allocated facility diversion rates for C&D materials, not materials diversion by specific job site. So if it comes to our facility, gets mixed in with a bunch of C&D and dry waste, we sort it out, we can report back to the contractor for what we're getting from that facility, but not for that specific job. Next slide, please. This is kind of what a lot of, nope, went too far somehow, or no. Jumped ahead a little bit. We should be on 19. There it is. Oh. It's a pile of construction and demolition debris. Should look familiar to folks who have seen a new development go in near their house. Next slide, please. Option three would be similar to current practices, meaning a drop box would be provided for a construction job site, but instead of the material going to the landfill, we would sort the materials at the transfer station into different commodities. Some of it will end up landfill bound, but we hopefully could glean a lot of material out of that. Because we could also accept dry waste loads from other generators, we think there is potential to divert a lot more material from the landfill bound waste stream with this option. Rate and implementation impacts would be high because we currently do not have covered space at the transfer station to conduct dry waste and C&D sorting. DEQ requires this material to be sorted undercover. Under option three, we would not be able to provide job site specific material diversion reporting, but could again provide facility level diversion data for different material streams. Next slide, please. You already saw this. That's what it looks like at a job site with a drop box. Next slide, please. I'm trying to move forward because I know we extended our time here. I'm just waiting on my boss. There we go. Option four. Okay, so this is our final dry waste C&D option. It's very similar to option three. Materials would be delivered, though, to the transfer station by the contractors themselves, or for that matter, the general public, like the do-it-yourselfers, et cetera. Those materials would be sorted at the transfer station. This option similarly would have the potential to divert quite a bit of material, but again, this would have significant rate impacts because of the need for capital investment in the transfer station. Due to capacity and throughput issues at the transfer station, under option 4, we would not be able to provide load-based material diversion reporting to these customers. Next slide, please. Once. It's a picture of a trailer in a transfer station being unloaded.
I didn't even go back. There we go.
Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Chris after this, after he gets to the next slide. And we're getting close here.
All right, so very similar to the other slides that talks about where it goes. Option 1 and 2, this is just a reload out in the field. We'd bring it back in separate containers and be able to dump it into separate bunkers, if you will, wood, metal. Option 3 and 4, material would be sorted at the transfer station here locally if we did some investment in some space and reconfigured our existing building. As the folks that came by, you saw that our baler's right in the middle of our facility. So there's some work we need to do there. Or we could haul it direct to a facility that's currently doing that. The closest one is in Hillsboro. Hillsboro landfill has a MRF there where they do a dry sort.
Okay, so this is similar to the other slide. This is kind of a consolidation slide. Show you all the options, show you the high-level criteria that we created. Would you like to pause here and talk about, is there one more?
Councilors have any questions? Council President?
Yeah, I would like to understand, as far as rate increase and capital investment needed, it seems tonnage-wise, if we're trying to keep tons out of the landfill, this dry waste and C&D would generate more tonnage and save more space out of a landfill than standing up a proteins and everything goes food debris waste stream diversion. Is that correct? Or
well, so the issue with C&D is it gets expensive because you got to put some labor and time into it. Where when trash hits the ground, it gets reloaded, it goes in a container, and it goes to the landfill. C&D, there's an excavator, there's some labor to sort it, so there's an extra cost there. And then you've got to ship each one of those to market, right? And the commodity like wood right now is we're paying to find a home for that stuff. Sometimes we even grind it and send it straight to the mill for hog fuel. There's a cost associated with that. To put it in perspective for you in terms of the gate rate for C&D at Hillsboro landfill is $165 a ton because there's so much cost into that. But they're diverting quite a bit of it. So that's the cost benefit of it in terms of the diversions there, but it's expensive to do.
And if I could add, the only material in that waste stream that has value is metal. And most of the job sites are pretty good at capturing that metal themselves, like a lot of scrappers will come pick it up. So when you're looking at C&D loads, you're looking at wood waste, plaster, mixed plastic, some trash, asphalt shingles sometimes, which I think might have to go somewhere else, but there's not a lot of market value to that material. That's why those costs for C&D material recovery facilities are actually higher than just putting it in a hole in the ground. There are environmental benefits, which is why a lot of regions invest in C&D sorting, is because of the environmental benefits, but it is more costly.
Thank you.
To follow up on that, what I was getting at was, it looks like we can divert 8 to 12% of our McMinnville waste stream for, I'm guessing, cheaper than retrofitting the whole, for our ratepayers. Is it going to be cheaper, or are we talking the same? It says high and high on both spreadsheets, so.
Yeah, well, in order for us to sort it, we have to do an expansion of the building, so that's why you're seeing it's high. And then there's potentially a higher rate to sort this stuff. So that's why it looks that way. It's the capital investment plus the additional labor to sort it and machinery.
But are they the same highs, or is one $15 a month and one's $30 a month?
So the rate, if we do an investment in capital or extension of the building, that's the type of cost that we can spread out over 10, 15 years. When we look at labor, that's the immediate cost impact. So we would look at what type of infrastructure we think we need. Is it $2 million? Is it $3 million? Is it $4 million of impact or investment? And then we'd look at what that rate impact would be across 10 years, 15 years, whatever the life of the building is, or the how we can depreciate and amortize that investment. And then just the labor we could figure out pretty quickly. So if it's where you want to go, then we'll go back and start throwing numbers together and looking at the options.
And just to clarify, they're still going to pay to dump that. It's not like it's recycling for free. They're still.
Nope.
And they're going to pay more than what they pay right now?
They could potentially. What we want to do is, we want to look at that and see what we would target. It also depends on what we're trying to pull out of there and what the markets are doing. So wood used to be very viable, not so much anymore, and we chatted about that. That has to do with hog fuel and mills closing. It is one of the larger products that come out of there. So if it's something that we target and it has a high diversion rate, but it's expensive to move and find a home for, then it could potentially be more than throwing it away, to your point.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Menke?
You've kind of alluded to it, but just to be clear on this one, this would be paid by the contractors that were using this service, not by the overall ratepayer.
It would be, it would be the rate. If they came in with a C&D load, we would charge them the C&D rate. It would go into a separate space where we would sort it.
Thank you.
Not spread across the standard ratepayers?
No.
Yeah, this would be a user fee.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
In all four options?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
correct.
Are there other counselors with questions, given the hour, unless you have, Councillor Gary?
Just kind of quick for follow-up, be interested, I think maybe I had a similar train of thought, or a little slightly different than what Councillor Garvin's first two questions were about, but interested in the percentage, the difference in the weighted percentage of the initial food options that you were talking about, the 1% to 2% diversion. I see 1% to 2% diversion of C&D waste as a greater sum. And so interested to dive into those numbers a little bit, just in terms of things to follow up with. And then secondly, perhaps in the vein, and maybe for staff to come back with an analysis of that franchise discussion, to talk about gaps in, is this something we want Recology, our franchise holder, to prop up, or is this something we want to be able to see if third-party providers are able to provide this service at a more competitive rate without changing their operations, but able to accomplish for construction and demolition that happens in the city?
Thank you, Councillor Payne. Or is that, it sounded more statement than question-y. Okay. Councillor Payne?
Thank you. I, again, agree with the points that Council President and Councilman Gary have brought up. I am curious if other funding mechanisms have been explored for modifications to facility to take on dry waste and C&D, specifically, like it's an EPA priority to get this stuff out of landfills. So I'm just curious if there's other funding sources that have been considered for facility modification.
There are grants available, especially, and we could talk a little bit about it, or maybe we can come back and talk about the impact of RMA, some funding options there. Occasionally the state will throw out some grants for higher diversion. There's a lot of it in electricity right now in terms of electric vehicles, that kind of thing. We were able to secure some Metro loans for the compost facility in North Plains because it was going to feed there. That probably wouldn't apply here, but we'll explore those options for sure.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Gary?
Just one more, sharing my professional perspective in the construction industry. As someone who runs a job site where on site we spend a ton of time, effort, and energy in sorting before it goes and moving things away ourselves, or helping people move already sorted stuff, or making the choice to put it all in one unit and have someone sort it. Being someone who really is cautious about how that happens on site, that puts me as anathema in the construction industry. It's not what commonly is done. It's the giant pile in the front yard that just gets dumped. And so if it's Recology providing the solution for making the biggest dent in C&D, to me, it would have to be the most turnkey operation. I want to bring my big boy dump truck to Recology. I want to dump it on the floor, and I want to drive away, and I want you to take care of it. Agreed. I think that's going to be the most effective way to handle the most diversion most effectively for C&D. I think the lesser options are still going to be a frustratingly inefficient way. So,
yeah, and I'll just add, Councilman Garvin, sorry. The other piece about diversion, there's incentive for us to do it because it does take away from our disposal cost. And if we can find a home for it that's less expensive, there's great incentive to do that. And so I just wanted to make sure, and to your point, you refreshed my memory about that.
Councilor Peralta or Chenoweth, do you have anything you'd like to ask before we move on?
I would just like to echo the need to understand what high means in terms of ratepayer increases. High, I don't know what that means. That's a subjective term.
I think that's a great question for all three ranges, is for us to understand what those mean. Thank you. Please go on.
Okay, we are nearing the end here. Just a few other diversion strategies. I think you asked earlier, Mayor, about like how other things that we could do. We are investing in education and outreach, which will lead to waste reduction and increased recycling and cleaner recycling. And you've met Cade, he's in the room here.
Can I steal it? Yeah. It's all going to be Cade's problem, and it's all going to be Cade's fault. He's here to solve everything for us. No pressure.
I'm just going to say that Cade's role is to support McMinnville and the other cities here in the valley and the county to help businesses, schools, multifamily properties, and residents reduce waste, recycle right, reduce contamination, and overall foster more sustainable living. We're really excited to have him on board. Second, I just want to mention, and we've talked a little bit about this before, Recycling Modernization Act will take effect July 1, 2025, and this could mean some changes to our recycling system here in McMinnville, including upgrades at the recycling depot at the transfer station, and that will include the ability to recycle styrofoam again, which we're very excited about, paid for by the RMA. Styrofoam is a RMA required material. So I am working with your Public Works Director, Jeff, on planning for RMA implementation, and I would be happy to come back and do a dedicated session on what the RMA looks like and what the opportunities are for McMinnville. Okay. We have added more materials at the recycling depot in McMinnville. I've mentioned that previously, wanted to say that again. As Chris mentioned earlier, we are expanding our collaboration with Zero Waste McMinnville, the Plastics Project, Edible McMinnville, and Chapel Farms, and discussing ways that Recology can help these different organizations achieve their sustainability goals. I'm also in the process of applying to join the Zero Waste McMinnville board, and I'm excited about that opportunity as well. And then there's one more idea, which is a whole other conversation, but it is something that has been done in a government not too far from here, that they went from weekly garbage and every other week recycling to weekly recycling and weekly yard debris and every other week garbage. It was controversial. A lot of complaints from customers. Some customers hate it, some customers love it, but I will say that they report that they saw a 30% reduction in their landfill-bound waste stream after doing that. So it has the potential to divert a significant amount of material from the landfill. If you looked at that in coordination with adding food waste, adding some C&D, you move your diversion rate pretty far there with a program like that. So we can leave that discussion to another day. Next slide, please. We've gone through this, just want to put it up there in case we were having this discussion that we've already had at the end. This just kind of brings those primary set of options together in one slide. I don't think we need to talk about this, so I'm going to say thank you very much for your time and your questions. We've been taking notes. Chris, do you want to close us out?
I'm just going to echo what Dan is saying. Thank you for the time. We hope this has been helpful. We got good feedback from you. I believe we're slated to come back in January, mid-January, like the 21st, something like that. And so we'll take your feedback and we'll try to apply some pricing approximates on here. Obviously, that's going to change if, things take years to implement, that kind of thing. But to your point, it's hard to make decisions about high, medium, low. Today's exercise was just to kind of give you an outline.
Great. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for all the time and information today, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you for joining us. Thanks to everybody at the Recology team that took the time to be with us this evening. Thank you. Okay, that's not it, folks. We are now going to go to comments from community members. Any interested audience member is invited to provide comment, and any comment provided that requires some type of follow-up will be assigned to a staff member. Anyone may speak on any topic other than a matter in litigation, a quasi-judicial land use matter, or a matter scheduled for public hearing today or at some future date. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person for a total of 30 minutes. If you're on Zoom and you wish to speak, please use the raise your hand feature or send a chat directly to our city recorder team. When your turn is up, we will announce your name and unmute your mic. As a reminder to everyone, we need you to state your name and the city in which you reside for the record, and also to fill out a comment card and provide it to our city recorder team. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment this evening?
Yes, we have 2 people signed up.
Who's the first person, please?
William Sykes.
Wonderful, thank
And
you.
I would like to add, just for the record, that Mr. Sykes submitted public comment that went to council via email earlier today. It will be added to the amended packet and posted on the city website tomorrow.
Yes, thank you. We received the letter similar to prior testimony. Thank you for coming back again today. And as you state your name and the city, the floor is yours.
Is my mic on? Okay, thank you.
Your mic's on.
Mayor Dradkin, thank you. Esteemed council. Claudia, Daniel, thank you. My name is William Sykes. I'm from McMinnville. I've been here 6 times to talk about loud vehicles, an exhibition of speed. By this time, we've all heard it. And now you hear it early in the morning when these folks are going to work. This is the 2nd time I've brought proposals to the city council. I want to thank Councilperson Chenoweth for reaching out to me. I enjoyed our discussion, and I look forward to further discussions. I'm asking the city council for a special committee to address these loud vehicles. Again, I feel like we need a committee for this. I trust that all my messages have been well received. I thank the News Register for covering this. I believe that the 2 laws that are being violated, and I'm not an attorney, is Municipal Code 810-260 and ORS 815-025. Tonight I submit 2 documents. One is a proposal that you've already seen. I submitted it on March 23rd. And it kind of outlines what we need to get this going. The second document that I provided tonight is a proof of concept document for what's called an audio camera, okay? And these are similar to the stop cameras that you have in Newburgh, the running the stoplight camera. This is an audio camera, and it takes video and audio and attempts to help rein in some of this nuisance. I've identified a vendor who is willing to loan us 2 of these cameras free of charge for a period of time so that we can test the content gathered by these cameras and see if it's admissible in a court of law. I hope that folks will start to take this seriously. It's only gotten worse. It's happened 5 times since we've been here for the last hour. Please, City Council, let's move forward and do something here. There are solutions that we need to consider. McMinnville's not alone. This is happening everywhere. Please join us at stopthenoisemac.com, stopthenoisemac.com. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you for joining us again. Who else has signed up for public comment this evening?
Tamsin Cranmer.
Thank you, welcome back as well. So a reminder, please state your name, the city where you reside for the record, and then your time will begin.
I'm Tamsin Cranmer. I live here in McMinnville. Normally, I was talking about, I had a schedule of things I wanted to talk about, but something's come up since last time and we need to talk. The current state of housing and homeless services in our community is failing us in ways that are not just neglectful, but actively harmful. As someone who's experienced this firsthand, I feel it's crucial you understand what's really happening on the ground. YCAP is the only major resource for housing in our area, but instead of helping people get off the streets, they are leaving rooms empty while our neighbors sleep outside. Even more troubling, the people who do get housed in the motel are often from out of county, out of state, and out of town, while local residents are left without assistance. The police, who are supposed to protect and serve, are enforcing camping ordinances with an aggression that is deeply dehumanizing. Just recently, a man waiting for his ride was harassed and ticketed, not because he was homeless or camping, but simply because he was standing on 3rd Street. This kind of enforcement only deepens the trauma for those of us who are already struggling to survive. But it's not just about the enforcement. It's about a system that is broken. YCAP caseworkers have lost Section 8 vouchers for 2 clients that I know of for a fact, and almost for us ourselves. Others are pushed into temporary housing solutions that only delay the inevitable. And we spent 6 years on the housing wait list, and it took some scrambling to keep us on it because of errors that they made. We almost, anyway. They keep throwing past evictions and criminal histories in our faces, even when those records are over 20 years old. And they point out ignoring the solutions that they already are aware of and that we've brought to them that can help us overcome these. I've seen them intimidate and manipulate people, denying them the right to have an advocate present and forcing them into decisions that are not in their best interest. This isn't help, it's harm. We're being made to feel like our lives don't matter. We need an investigation into YCAP's practices, better oversight, and a different way of dealing with the camping ordinances. We need real solutions like bathrooms, storage facilities, and a place for people to go. We need a place that's safe. We can't just keep talking about this. We need to do something. There are people that are getting seriously hurt, and even if you do get into the YCAP shelter, which is the only one here in this county, it doesn't guarantee you that you're going to get anything but just as harassed inside that shelter as outside that shelter by the staff that are in it. They had to be threatened to keep their end of the bargain with us and our application fees, and that's just one of the minor things that are going on inside that motel. And it's not okay. They've got almost 20 rooms empty right now, and people are getting hurt outside. And I don't know what they're doing, but it needs to be looked at, because trying to force a lady into assisted living that doesn't want to go.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming back. Do we have anyone else signed up for public comment this evening?
No one else has signed up.
Is there anyone in the gallery? Okay, please remember to sign up comment card when you're done. Come and join us up here, please. And I will remind you to state your name and the city in which you reside for the record.
Margaret Cross. I live in McMinnville on Russ Lane. Nice to see everybody again. I have a short list of things that I've been mulling over and that have popped into my head over the last few months, so I thought I'd consolidate them and just throw them out to you. First one, I was thinking it would be very nice if we could start using some of our hotel and tourism tax dollars to install wayfaring signs in the historic district. Attractive signage would benefit the general public as well as tourists and businesses. These are kind of long overdue. Surely we could find some money out of that budget, and I know it's limited, but anyway. Second, this one's dear to my heart, and I appreciate the guy that talked about the noise. Would you consider passing a 5-year plan to phase out 2-stroke leaf blowers? These blowers violate the city noise ordinance, all the time. The one used by my neighbor's yard service routinely exceeds 95 dBs. These guys are all going to be deaf by the time they're 35. They're big polluters. They're bad for respiratory health because of the particulates they blow into the air. And on a personal note, they're really driving me crazy. So I'd like you to start talking about that and thinking about it. Just phase them out. The very least, when you buy replacement equipment for the city, please go to the electric or battery instead of the gas two-stroke. I'm wondering if it's possible to obtain a summary of money spent by the city in hiring consultants, particularly during the last 3 fiscal years. I'd like to be able to know how much each department spends on consultants and also be able to link that cost directly to the reports that are generated by that consultant. And going through the budget, you can't get that detail or be able to access the report that was generated. Surely this could be done with all the computer stuff we have. Okay, last one. As with all big plans, like we're coming into the housing thing now, and we did with 3 Mile and with Park and Rec Bond, I would encourage you to provide 1 hard copy of these plans to the library for both public use and archival use. These are big plans. They're difficult to read online, and it may be that only a few people access them in the library. But for those that are interested, it really makes them much easier to read and understand and to be able to take notes on them. Just little things bugging me, so thanks for your time. Good to see you hard at work, and thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you so much. Was there anyone else who would like to provide public comment this evening? Or anyone on Zoom that would like to provide public comment this evening? In just a second. Okay. We'll now go to advice and information. I'll start to my right this evening with Councilor Menke.
There's a Parkway, excuse me, there's a Parkway meeting on Thursday at 7:30. It's on Zoom. That's pretty much it.
Thank you, Councilor Payne.
That's pretty much it. I got nothing.
Thank you, Councilor Peralta.
Council of Governments held its legislative local government gathering on August 20th at Chemeketa Ag Station. It was very well attended and good success. Also, for those of you who were hearing my reports in 2022 and 2023 about getting allocations from the legislature to for COG to support local planning departments, that money has come through now after only 8 months since Sine Die. So we're, that should start becoming available to COG members. MCM 11 welcomed the George Fox Cinematic Arts student Austin to the studio this week, and she will be working with MCM 11 as an intern, getting credit for school. And MCM 11 passed 250,000 views on their YouTube channel this month. The viewers spent 21,650 hours of watching MCM on YouTube, most of those city council meetings. So,
For planning.
Thank you. Councilor Gary? No, you're going to tell a joke. You should tell it to everyone, you know.
I had a lot of material.
I'll take the compliment that was a joke. DEIAC meeting Thursday, rolling out the draft of the assessment. MURAC had no meeting. The meeting was canceled. Not enough agenda. The affordable housing between meetings and the 3rd Street improvement has a meeting coming up on the 16th. Where we'll kind of come back with potential design modifications to create additional flexibility downtown.
Thank you, Councilor Chenoweth.
In the words of my esteemed fellow counselor Jessica Payne, I got nothing.
Thank you, Council President.
Yeah, Visit McMinnville's in the final stages of their CEO interviews. We do have a wayfinding and signage thing in Visit McMinnville that is pretty much complete. It just hasn't been implemented. I think that came off the rails around the COVID time, but I know it is on the board's radar to get that back up and going. Just with the vacant CEO, we've had other things take priority. And Airport Commission, if you didn't hear, we had some planes in town over Labor Day weekend, so the air show was a success. They did acknowledge they don't really want to have an air show on Labor Day weekend again because that Monday was pretty low in attendance. City Manager Towery and I got to go out there Thursday night and meet the Thunderbirds and some of the other flight crews. Him and I each got a pretty special coin from the #1 chief pilot of the Thunderbirds, as well as Bill said he would come to a council meeting most likely in October and present us with coins. And they honored Chief Scales in a special way on the coin, so I'll let you wait to see your personal coin and see what you can figure out represents Chief Scales.
Oh, fantastic. Excited to report that we had 8 submissions on the Northwest Rubber site, so that's really exciting news, and a really high number of submissions, which is also really exciting. And then we also started working today with our federal lobbyist, and I'm going to go to staff for department head reports. Could I start with you, City Manager Towery? Wait, I'm sorry, just kidding. Council President?
Today, and they're going to go to every other month format and move it from 2 o'clock on Tuesday to 3 o'clock on Tuesday. So November will be my last YCOM meeting, and whoever takes that over, you'll have half the amount of meetings.
Okay, you put in your bids now. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to expand on part of Council President Garvin's report, there was actually a media release that was generated, dated today by Visit McMinnville, so I can announce that Dan Gibson has been hired as the next CEO of Visit McMinnville. Dan will come to us from Tucson, where he has a long and varied career. He'll be starting his position with Visit McMinnville in late October, and I'll share that press release with the council later this evening or tomorrow morning. Last thing to report is I'll be leaving town next Thursday for my final board meeting with the International City County Managers Association, our annual conference, and a few days of vacation. So I'll be out of the office for 7 days starting next Thursday. I will miss the council meeting on the 24th. Thank you.
Thank you. Public Works Director Megan Murray. Oh, sorry, Jeff Hunsiker. Oh, you have the wrong name tag in here.
Oh, I was going to say, where'd that come
It's
from?
only funny to the 3 of us over here, but at least I told everyone the joke. No.
Nothing to report.
Thank you. City Attorney David Leitenberg.
Thank you, Mayor. Nothing from the legal department tonight.
Thank you, Heather Richards, Community Development Director. Thank you, Daniel Rees, City Recorder Team. Thank you. Going to Zoom, Jennifer Cuellar, Finance Director.
I have nothing for you this evening. Thanks.
Thank you, and Noelle Amaya, Communications and Engagement Manager.
Nothing new to report from me either. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now going to our consent agenda, and before we put this before us, there's only one item on it, which is the appointment, committee appointments, and I know that Yushan Chen has sat here through the whole meeting to have the opportunity to say hello, and Nancy, I don't believe is here, so.
No,
that's Noelle.
she isn't, Madam Mayor, but she did provide a written statement for me to read aloud for her if time is available for that.
Okay, so why don't we take a vote on the consent agenda first, and then we will welcome you up. So I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
I have a motion from Councilor Geary and a second from Council President. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed, say nay. The consent agenda is approved unanimously. Congratulations to our two new commissioners. Yushan Chen, would you like to come up and introduce yourself to the council and the community? And thank you very much for your service to the community of McMinnville.
I wrote something. I'm glad I got voted. Oh, a joke. Okay.
Just remember to speak into the microphone so everyone at home can hear you too.
All right. Thank you.
close to your mouth. Close.
Hello?
We got
There
you.
we go.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening. Thank you so much for having me here, Mayor Drapkin and councilors. My name is Yushan Chen, and I'm honored and delighted to introduce myself as a new member of the DEI Advisory Committee here at the City of McMinnville. I deeply appreciate the recognition and am excited to collaborate with all of you in this role. A little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Taiwan and moved to the United States by myself at the age of 19. My journey has taken me to various states and rural communities, including Vail, Colorado, Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and a tiny island in Hawaii called Lanai with only 3,500 people on there. So where I often find myself very different from the rest of my peers in many aspects. These experiences have provided me with a unique perspective into diversity and equity, and I'm eager to share these insights and experiences with you. My life goal has always been to be the change I want to see in the world and act as the game changer in my own life and others' life. I've been in hospitality management for the last 15 years, but it is my work at Linfield University has given me a valuable glimpse into how, as citizens and educators, we can advocate for social justice and drive meaningful change. I'm enthusiastic about rolling up my sleeves and getting to work on our shared goals. Thank you for the opportunity to serve, and I look forward to working together and make a positive impact in our community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Noelle, would you like to read Nancy's statement?
Yes, I would. Thank you very much. Let me pull it up right here. Okay, so this is from committee member Nancy Messias. Greetings, city councilors. My name is Nancy Messias Tapia, and I'm looking forward to continue working with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Committee as an official voting member. I have been part of this committee as an ex officio since January of 2024, volunteering alongside a wonderful group of community members, and I'm excited to continue this work. Outside of my committee efforts, I work for McMinnville School District supporting multilingual learners at an organizational level. I graduated from McMinnville High School and have earned my bachelor's degree in both international global development and political science. Equity is something I'm incredibly passionate about and eager to continue advocating for. Thank you for granting me the opportunity. Kindly, Nancy Macias Tapia.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming this evening. I will adjourn the meeting at 8:42 p.m.